Thank you for joining the Charlotte City Council business meeting for May the 24th. I hope everyone is doing well out there that's watching. I now call this meeting to order.
Mayor, hold on one second. Hold on.
Oh, sorry. What happened?
Hold on just 1 second. I'm stuck.
Do I need to start all over again?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Charlotte City Council business meeting for May the 24th. I hope everyone is doing well and is enjoying a little bit of a warm spell, I think. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. Tonight's meeting is being held as a virtual meeting in accordance with the electronic meeting statutes, and all of the required notices and access and minutes are being met through electronic means. If you're watching, I hope that you are on our government channel or the city's Facebook page or our YouTube page. So tonight we're going to begin with introductions of those that are physically present in the building, the council members, and then we'll go to those that are joining virtually. So I am Vi Lyles and I serve as mayor.
Good evening. I'm Julie Eisel, serve as Mayor Pro Tem and at large. Thank you.
Good evening, Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Larkin Eggleston, District 1.
Tarek Bakari, District 6.
All right, now to those that are on the virtual stage, if you go ahead and we'll start with our at-large members.
Greg Phipps at large.
Ms. Ajmira?
Braxton Winston at large.
Okay, Mr. Winston, thank you. Ms. Ajmira? I think we just lost your photo. There we are. You got the camera? Ms. Ajmira? Is she on, are you on mute, Ms. Ajmira?
I believe she's having some technical issues.
Okay, technical issues. So now we'll go to our remaining district members.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
All right. Several council members are, I think, sitting in a traffic jam on one of our highways, and they will join us as they can or will be able to. We always begin our meeting with some expression of inspiration, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. The invocation or inspiration is by a council member, and it's all about solemnizing the proceedings that we have as a council, because we recognize that there's religious diversity in our community, including those without a religious faith. Tonight, Councilmember Bakari will give our remarks, and then we will be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, who will be, Mr. Graham will lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance. All right, we'll come back around. So, all right, Mr. Bakari.
Thank you. Let us pray. Lord Jesus, it is you who wakes me up every day, and I am forever grateful for your love. This is why I pray. You let me touch so many people, and it's all for the good. We influence so many children we never thought that we would. And I couldn't take credit for the love they get, because it all comes from you, Lord, and I'm just the one that's given it. And when it seems like the pressures gets to be too much, I take time out and pray and ask that you be my crutch. Lord, I am not perfect by a long shot, I confess to you daily, but I work hard at every day, and I hope that you hear me. In my heart, I mean well, but if you'll help me to grow, then what I have in my heart will begin to show. And when I get going, I'm not looking back for nothing, because I will know where I'm headed. I'm so tired of the suffering. I stand before you, a weakened version of my reflection, begging for direction, for my soul needs resurrection. I don't deserve what you're giving me, but you never took it from me, because I am grateful, and I use it, and I do not worship money. If what you want from me is to bring your children to you, my regret is only having one life to do it instead of two. Amen.
Amen. I think Mr. Newton's going to give us our Pledge of Allegiance now. If we could stand, and those of you that are present, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So with that, I'm going to ask the District 7 council member, as well as our other district member that's come to join us, to introduce themselves.
Good evening. I'm Ed Driggs, District 7.
Evening, Matt Newton, District 5.
Okay. We have several people in this room that provide us the professional support that we need to conduct these meetings. And now I'd like to start with the introduction of our staff in our room. To our city clerk, if you start for us, please.
Stephanie Kelly, City Clerk.
Billy Ton, City Clerk's Office.
Stephanie Bello, Deputy City Clerk.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Kay Cunningham, Mayor's Office.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
All right. We've also got a group of people that throughout the meeting are supportive of questions or comments and are available to us, and they will be introduced if they are called upon. So with that, I'd like to do a brief recognition that tomorrow, May 25th, will mark the one-year anniversary of the tragic and senseless death of George Floyd. His death, along with many others, has impacted the ever-changing landscape of this country. The streets of America and cities around the entire world were flooded with protesters calling for change to a system that desperately needed reform. George Floyd's death shined a light on long-standing inequities within our criminal justice system, ensuring that we review, improve, and restructure the way policing is done here in this country. And the reform doesn't begin with just a change in policy. It's just where that ends. Reform really begins when we have a change of heart and then followed by a change in behavior. We've come a long way, and there is still much work to be done. So let's remember George Floyd and the countless others whose lives have been needlessly taken. Let's continue to work together to do everything we can to prevent any more of these tragedies from occurring. I hope that the residents of our city will recognize the work that has been done by this council, by many of the people that assisted us in this community, bringing us their voices and their chances, and to recognize our police department, who has gone through a number of amazing changes and have really come and said, we will join in this effort for a safer community, a safer Charlotte for everyone. So with that, I just want to remind everyone, tomorrow is a day that it's been a year, and it's been a year of challenge and change. And I want to say for our city, I believe that we have done it well in a collaboration in a way that makes us proud to live in this community. So with that, I just wanted to now recognize that we're going to move into our action review with the city manager giving us a headline of what we're going to go through in the next hour or so.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Tonight we have two items on the agenda. Our CARES Act update. So Sean Heath will come in and talk about the remaining funds related to the ESG pot of money, if you will. And then, as we discussed the last time we were together, we have an update on the 2040 comp plan and one closed session item, Mayor.
All right. So we should start with Sean coming in right now?
Yes. I don't know if he wants to do consent.
No, I think we will do consent after.
Any questions?
Oh, do we need the questions for consent? I believe it's your places or email to those that are virtual. We had consent questions asked by Mr. Phipps. Mr. Phipps, have you gotten a copy of your responses? And Ms. Harris is coming to the podium.
Yes, I have, Mayor. I have a copy.
Okay, thank you. I think everyone has a copy. Ms. Harris, is there anything to add?
No, ma'am, but I didn't catch everyone, so please let me know if you had any additional information needs you had tonight.
All right. Well, there are no staff items to remove from the agenda, so let's go and we'll ask at this time so that people can be prepared. Is there anything that anyone on the council would like to have as a separate vote? Ms. Harris, did you hear of anyone?
No, ma'am.
Is there any item that a council member would like to comment on or have for which to comment? All right, so I think we're all in great shape there. So now we'll proceed to the CARES Act Emergency Solutions Grant Report. Thank you, Ms. Harris.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sean Heath from the City Manager's Office. It's a pleasure to be here. As Manager Jones mentioned, I wanted to provide a brief update on some of the remaining balances we have associated with the CARES Fund. And you'll recall that all of the stimulus funding from 2020 has been appropriated by Council, but it's been our practice to keep you informed with what we're doing as we stage investments. So tonight I'll talk primarily about the CARES Emergency Solutions Grant remaining balance, but also give you a little bit of a window into a couple other remaining balances associated with 2020 stimulus funds. As shown here, the remaining Emergency Solutions Grant balance is approximately $1 million. And staff is enthused to share with you tonight that we have two investments that have been staged. One is with a nonprofit that some of you are very familiar with called The Relatives. The Relatives has been doing great work in this community for almost 50 years. They do a number of things, but I think it's fair to say that it all falls under the umbrella of working with youth and young adults that are in some form of crisis. One of their signature programs is On-Ramp. On-Ramp has been around for about 10 years. And it's really a case management model designed to work specifically with young adults in the age 16 to 24 age category. And the services provided touch on everything from employment to education to housing. And I think one of the things that makes this unique is over the past 3 years, they've connected with approximately 1,500 members of the community. And this is a particular segment of the community that's very vulnerable in many ways. A lot of the participants that are in this program don't have a high school diploma or a GED. Many of them aren't currently employed, or if they are, they're employed in a minimum wage job. So with this case management model, it's an opportunity for them to really focus on one thing, and that's how do you help these individuals become independent adults. So the support that we've staged here is for 3 years of operating support, $750,000 to help them continue to sustain and scale this particular drop-in resource center. The second investment opportunity is with The Roof Above, of course, a partner that we've worked with on many initiatives in recent years. And here the focus is on the Giles Center, which many of you are familiar with on Statesville Avenue. Just a quick history on the Giles Center. They closed last July as a result of the pandemic. And subsequent to that, Roof Above took a number of actions, made a number of investments to help reopen the center in December. So they reduced the capacity, they invested in some sleeping barriers, and they found ways to reconfigure it so the beds could be socially distanced. So they opened up in December for the winter months with the original vision of closing it down again in March. But as the weather changed. But it turns out the demand for this particular shelter remains incredibly high. So their hope is to continue to sustain this until March of 2022 if possible, and our investment opportunity will get them 5 months down the path in that direction. So with those two particular investments, that would fully extinguish the remaining balance for the Emergency Solutions Grant. So pivoting to other 2020 stimulus funds that are still at our disposal, two separate categories here. One relates to the Emergency Rental and Utility Assistance Program. So oftentimes we talk about CARES from 2020, but there were other stimulus packages that passed. And one was in very late December of 2020, which translated to $26.7 million in stimulus funding for the city of Charlotte, focused specifically on emergency rental and utility relief. That was appropriated by Council in February, and we've been working with DreamKeep partners to put that money into the community. We've dispersed about half of that, about $13 million has gone into the community. We have a remaining balance of $13 million. The way the application process is structured for this particular program, it opens up on the 1st of each month, it closes on the 15th. That gives DreamKey partners an opportunity to process all the applications. I was just in conversation with them today. It's my understanding they're working through thousands of applications at this time, and the enrollment will open up again on June 1st. I would note, as a little bit of an aside, under the American Rescue Plan, there will be an additional $21 million in emergency rental assistance provided under ARPA. So the remaining balance of $13 million here plus an additional $20 million under the American Rescue Plan will all be available for members of the community that are struggling with rent and with utilities. I would point the community in the direction of rampclt.com, where they can learn more about eligibility requirements for this funding. And then last, on the CARES CDBG dollars, we have $2 million still in that bucket. And the plan here is to fold this into the broader strategy. I think council's been very clear. The city manager has been very clear. Let's be strategic. Let's be intentional. With the American Rescue Plan, we have a tremendous amount of resources at our disposal. As we're evaluating opportunities around the American Rescue Plan, we will fold in the CDBG dollars here. And we'll also dovetail this with the work that's being done under the umbrella of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg 2025 Housing and Homelessness Strategy, co-chaired by Gene Woods and Kathy Bassant. So that initiative is really in the process of getting off the ground. There are dozens of leaders from across the public sector, private sector, and nonprofit sector that are actively involved. Manager Jones, Housing Director Weidman, myself, and a few other folks from the city are actively engaged in this effort. And
Mr. Graham.
And Mr. Graham, thank you very much. Thank you very much. No, there are a lot of things I believe to like about this. One, of course, is the multi-sector approach. And this will give us a chance as a community to put all the best ideas on the table, develop a menu of funding options. And if you look at the workstream towers that have been developed, it addresses both supply side and demand side considerations around housing and homelessness. So additional shelter capacity, additional affordable housing, yes, very much in scope, but so are efforts around mental health, substance abuse, education, workforce development, et cetera, et cetera. So strengthening the prevention system and also the social supports that can help us prevent homelessness a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, is really just as important as all of the other supply side considerations that are being factored into that work. So we'll be in the process over the next few months of really being part of this effort, helping to lead this effort, and then ultimately evaluating funding opportunities. The next big milestone under that initiative is October 1st, when the strategic plan is expected to be launched and announced to the community. I'll pause there if there are any comments or questions from council.
Any comments or questions?
Mr. Phipps.
Mr. Phipps.
Yes, with regard to utility assistance, I want to be clear as to whether or not the city is continuing its utility payment abatement program, or has that been sunsetted?
Yes, we have indicated to the public that we will not resume our billing and disconnection practices until October of calendar year 2021. And Angela and I were in conversation today to think through what are some additional strategies we can put in place to make sure that all of our water customers that are struggling with their bills are fully aware of this particular program. There are eligibility requirements. Individuals have to be 80% AMI or below. There also has to be a demonstration of financial hardship associated with the pandemic. With this particular fund, we're expected to place a priority on individuals that are 50% or AMI or below. So we're doing everything we can to ensure that before we reach that October milestone, that customers that are struggling with their bill have a chance to take advantage of this program.
All right, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Johnson?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask about the utility assistance. Initially, there were several providers in the community that were able to assist with rental, deposit, utility assistance, and Crisis is a very well-known resource in the community. So I wanted to know if any dollars are allotted to crisis assistance or even to social serve. They were very helpful. Both those organizations were very, very helpful at the beginning of the COVID crisis. So I just wanted to follow up to see if there are other partners in the community, specifically Crisis, that will be receiving funding. Thank you.
if I could, I think Housing Director Weidman may be surrounding us somewhere here. If I could ask her to
All right.
help me with that
We're going to wait for
question.
Ms. Whiteman to come to the microphone.
I can hear footsteps.
Here we are. Good afternoon, Ms. Whiteman.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Ms. Johnson, I think your question was, as I was running here, I think your question was, will particularly crisis receive any of our utility assistance dollars, our CARES utility assistance dollars? Is that correct?
Yes, she's nodding her head.
Okay, very good. So we have allocated, the answer is no. We're working with Dream Key, formerly Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing Partnership, to administer our utilities, rental assistance, and our mortgage assistance. And they're doing so in a way that applicants can just fill out one form, so it's a very streamlined approach. However, Crisis does have other assistance funding from other partners in the community that they are using for this same cause.
Okay. I think they're coordinating.
They are coordinating. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. I think they have a shared information system between clients so that they can make sure that that happens. That's my recall, Mr.
That is correct. And the beauty of Crisis is that their funding is more flexible. As Mr. Heath alluded to earlier, we have our federal government guidelines. Theirs is more flexible, and so they can pivot faster than we can.
Okay.
So they work together.
Thank you.
Okay, and what about social serve? They won't be receiving any funding from the city either?
You may recall, Ms. Johnson, that several council meetings ago that I think it was $300,000 that you all allocated to social serve so that they could hire more housing navigators to assist with the work that United Way is doing. So they are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else that would have a question on the CARES or the upcoming emergency job or CARES funding, as well as the emergency program that's coming up? Can I ask a question? It's probably not related exactly to this, but can you give us, or at some point in the next several days or so, an update on what's going on with evictions? I've heard different dates from different places, and I mean the number of cases. When we started with this, we were working with the clerk's office, the clerk of court. CRC was doing notes to tell people how to go get legal services. The private sector had volunteer lawyers working with, I can never remember the new name for legal aid. But I just wondered if you could just give us an update, and
Sure.
so that we're aware and know when these things are rolling up and out.
Sure. So what's happening here on the ground in Charlotte?
Yes, what's happening on the ground here in Charlotte.
Got
That
it.
would be
Will do.
very helpful.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. You guys are doing an amazing job with this. Ordinarily, the manager has made these two recommendations, so is there any objection for proceeding to get this money out quickly again? Anyone, comments, thoughts?
If a motion is needed, I'll make one.
I'll second.
We've not actually taken motions on this because we've been trying to get the money out, but if there's anyone that thinks that we should be thinking about something different other than that. All right, I'm looking at the group on virtual. Any questions? All right, I see thumbs up from Mr. Winston, and everybody else seems to be good.
Just
All
wanna say
right,
great job.
proceed.
Great
Thank you.
job.
You guys are
The
doing
team.
good work, yes. Okay, I did want to bring up one other thing as a result, as we're talking about some of this homeless issues. Today, NACA, which is NACA, announced a partnership with Bank of America for $15 billion in mortgage assistance for low-income families. This is no down payment, no closing costs, no fees, and it's 2% interest rates for 30 years. So we have a NACA office here in Charlotte. They're a national firm that does this work, but we have one in Charlotte. I think all of us would like to have a 2% 30-year mortgage or a 1.375 for a 15-year mortgage. I would encourage all of us to look at the materials, get that information out, because this is where home ownership can really make a difference in our community, and working with this group who really does do amazing things through workshops and getting people home buying experiences and making sure that they're financially literate to maintain that home. So I want to thank NACA and Bank of America for making that contribution to the well-being of our city especially. All right, so we're going to now go into our Mayor. I'm sorry. Mr. Winston.
Yes, ma'am. I was wondering, just with you mentioning that, knowing that Bank of America has been one of our community partners around the Choice Fund with LISC, wondering maybe, sometime over the summer, if there's not a way to kind of have some type of workshop where we might explore how, using the models that we have or kind of exploring them, is there a way that we can kind of maximize the utility of this program or this new investment here in the community by using Housing Trust Fund and that choice and whatever fund this is, if that makes any sense?
Well, we'll figure it out and try to make sure that it makes some sense and we go forward for the summer. Mr. Graham and his group will continue, Ms. Whiteman. Yes, we should explore every option. Thank you, Mr. Winston. All right, so our next favorite topic, that's the sound of laughter in the background. I need a... So we're now going to move on to our Charlotte 2040 Comprehensive Plan update.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council members. Good evening to you. I just have a brief presentation to cover some ground, and then we can have a moment of asking questions, and then I'll be ready to answer them. So the first thing is to acknowledge the fact that last week we did review key policy languages from you, and with that we incorporated them into the released recommended plan that came out last week. So what I'll be doing today will be to review with you other revisions that were based on comments we had from you or from the public or even county commissioners or planning commissioners, other agencies. However, before I do that, I want to kind of walk us through this slide that's on the screen right now as to how we've been receiving comments, processing them, and then incorporating the relevant ones into the plan itself. We received, upon the release of the first draft and prior to the release of the recommended draft last week, we received over 600 comments in total. And about 515 of those comments actually came from the community and staff. Over 60 of them came from council. 500 plus were comments or questions that did not necessarily require a change, but over 100 of them were technical, policy-related clarifications and typographical corrections. So what we did was to make sure that when people provide comments, we reach out to them, either as individuals or organizations. We met with them to clarify some of the questions that they may have, and then eventually some of those comments resulted in changes to the plan itself. We responded to every email with comments just to thank and acknowledge individuals, but I will note that not every comment made it into a revision, and there's a reason for that. If people are thanking you or people are just pretty much saying some other things that don't have to do necessarily with the plan, what we do was to make sure that we coordinate with the respective department to make sure that they have those comments. As of today, upon the release of the recommended draft plan last week, we have received over 70 comments between last week and this afternoon. About 9 of those people would like to meet with us individually to discuss their comments, and we're going to follow the same process as we did with the previous draft that was released. The intent is so that by the time the comment period is done on June 3rd and we come back to you on June 7th, you will be able to share more information with you in terms of how many comments total we received. Next slide.
These really are the ways that we've been asking for our community to provide comments, either to go on the website itself. So the spreadsheet is on the website. If people have comments they want to make, they are able to do that directly, or they can pretty much email us, or they can call 311. But like I said earlier, the process of receiving this comment to be the same. Let me explain why the next 2 weeks or a week and some now are is just very important. Number one is the transparency in the process. People took their time to provide comments. I think it's just the right thing for us to be able to release this for over a 2-week period so people can see those comments, view the document for the comments that they made and how they were addressed. Number two, it's likely that there will be comments that were missed, or people will say, well, we did not see our comments reflected in the plan. How did you address that? So during this 2-week period, as we receive those comments, we will continue to process them with individuals and organizations to make sure that everyone feels that, their comments have been listened to, even if they did not result in any change to the document. Next slide, please. So the recommended draft highlights, I will not necessarily spend too much time on this, but this is what you all have spent time on over the last several weeks. And we've had comments made around a number of what I call hot topic items, whether they be housing diversity in our neighborhoods or 10-minute neighborhoods application, equity in infrastructure. That was one that came towards the end, but it was definitely one that we felt was necessary to be included in the plan, recommended draft. Anti-displacement language around that, formation of an anti-displacement stakeholder group, formation of a community benefit stakeholder group, community participation in the development process, as well as fiscal and economic impact analysis conversations. So through multiple council and community engagement opportunities, we addressed these items, and we believe that they were incorporated appropriately in the released recommended plan that you have. There are other revisions, however, that are just as important but have not received the same level of attention. And I'd like to spend the next few slides sharing some of those with you. I'll go goal by goal. Goal number one on 10-minute neighborhoods, a couple revisions that we received from county staff, as well as some of our city staff, is to collaborate with county to prioritize investment in public gathering areas, plazas, parks, shared use path in parts of our city and county that lack such facilities or amenities today. Because if you're talking about 10-minute neighborhood, it's not just providing access, but destinations. How do people get to those facilities or to those amenities? We've talked about making sure that we have pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. We meet those gaps in areas that are near schools, parks, greenways, activity centers, and community facilities. We specifically made a change to Policy 1.16 to invest in programs that address cultural and language barriers which may hinder access to essential amenities, goods, and services. Goal number two, let's go back to that slide, please. Yes, goal number two on neighborhood diversity and inclusion. We called out references to tiny homes, modular housing, co-housing, and also to definitely provide education and guidance on development of innovative housing solutions. We've seen those in other places where you can actually print homes using 3D mechanism to do that. So the comprehensive plan actually highlighted some of those technological innovation that could be part of the housing solution as we go into the future. Next slide. Goal number three, in terms of housing access for all, we wanted to call attention, obviously, to naturally occurring affordable housing, but also manufactured housing in the plan. I know there's been a lot of conversations around Plex units, but we felt that this was also one that needed to be called attention to. And then to consider working with the county to develop new programs that could mitigate impacts of rising property values, because county has a program right now for seniors, but how can we work with them in developing new programs that can actually help mitigate impacts of rising property values, especially on low-income households in areas where housing costs are rapidly appreciating. Goal number 4 did not, again, get a lot of attention, but we talked there a lot about something that we do today that we're already doing through CLT, which is really the CLT Land Trust, which is really establishing a fund for land banking strategies around new transit investment. This morning we heard from our Executive Director of CATS that we do have the ability to do that today. So the plan wanted to call attention to that and to make sure that while we're talking on one hand about anti-displacement, how can we also continue to work with our own internal partners such as CATS, Housing and Neighborhood Services, to see where we can leverage some of the resources that we have today. Next slide, please. Goal number 5, which talks about the safe and equitable mobility. You might have seen this goal before, and that's because we highlighted it in association with the Transformation and Mobility Network that, by 2040, every Charlottean should have access to safe and equitable mobility options in our city, but also to look at those emerging transportation services technologies. If you recall, back in January, we invited representatives or experts who came to share with us some of the emerging transportation services and technologies that we may not have today. Mayor Pro Tem, myself, and Liz Babson, Director of Department of Transportation, were on a trip to Columbus a few days ago to look at their mobility hubs. Those are the types of things that we think we need to we ought to be investing in our community today. So the plan calls attention to that and really emphasizes how that can be done, especially when we start going through the different programs and specific projects in the plan. Goal number 6, healthy, safe, and active communities, is really Charlotte continues to be diverse in terms of population, and we know that that's very important. You go to some other communities, I will cite Portland, Oregon as an example, where if you jump on their train system, once it gets into another part of the city where there is a group of people who speak different languages, instantly the announcements change into that language so that people who do not speak English can really understand where they're going or where they are. We've talked a lot about wayfinding and how if people are walking on a trail or they want to have access to one, how can we make sure that we make it easier for people to navigate our city streets and our public space. But perhaps the most important thing to call out in that space is developing a public space master plan that identifies opportunities for parks, for plazas, and other public spaces. And we're working on this together with our county colleagues at Park and Recreation, since they are working on their own master plan as well. Next slide. On this next slide, the one that I really believe it's very important is that one on goal number 7 on climate action plan. That was specifically called out by one of your county colleagues, Commissioner. And so even though the plan had some things around it before, but did not really call that out. And we wanted to also make sure you see in the recommended draft, a lot of references to connecting this plan with the tree canopy action plan, the strategic energy action plan, not just loosely defined, but with specific policy ideas that can really help us to achieve our goal as part of SEA, but also our tree canopy action plan. And I'm sure that goal number 8 will probably come up as part of what Councilmember Newton had, the email that he sent earlier. But really, it's about when we defined our family sustaining wage, there was a reason we did not call it living wage. It's because family sustaining wage also includes benefits. And I know that that's one of the things that he had brought up. But also making sure that we collaborate with nonprofits and other providers in terms of training and mentoring strategies. The last slide, the next slide is actually the last one on the goals. And we had this a lot from our planning commissioners and from a number of our community members as well in terms of neighborhood-defined cultural displacement. How do we mitigate that? And that's really speaking to our Heart community, the Heartist community as well. What kind of incentives that we can have right now today for local businesses, markets, and community amenities. And we'll continue to develop a fund that can help us to maintain and program those, maybe not tomorrow, but at least over the next 20 years. And goal number 10, The one about directing at least half of public infrastructure investment into our most vulnerable communities was recommended by our fiscal impact analysis consultant when they did that. And that's not just speaking to, transportation. It speaks to different things, whether they be police facilities or fire facilities or fire stations or economic development opportunities or even things that it's really essentially building on our what we have today, corridors of opportunities in especially those vulnerable communities. Today, we don't have any mechanism for tracking equity in terms of infrastructure investments. How can we do that for other communities in such a way that it matches our equitable growth framework in the comprehensive plan? And then based on what you shared with us, to perform an economic impact analysis prior to the implementation phase of the plan. The last slide really is talking about next steps, and that is between now and June 3rd, we're going to continue to have dialogue around the comments that we received. Like I said earlier, we've received just over 70 of those comments as of today. We'll have a community conversation, 5:30 p.m. on May 27th, and then we're going to come back to you again to make a presentation there. We'll summarize some of what we've heard from the community based on this recommended draft. And then we will entertain if there are any potential revisions that you want to put forward based on those at that point in time. June 15, the Planning Committee will be making a recommendation to the Council. Just so I can explain clearly, the Planning Committee is based on the existing interlocal agreement between Mecklenburg County and the city. They are the body that will make that recommendation to the Council. And then we'll propose June 21 for the adoption of the final plan. Thank you very much. I'll stop at this point, and then I'll take questions.
All right. Mr. Eggleston?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ty. I don't have the exact language we voted on last week in front of me, but maybe somebody else does. On the 10-minute neighborhoods piece, I thought that we had voted in the affirmative to add language that contemplated how technology might change people's ability to access amenities, goods, and services via things like, but not limited to, home delivery of certain goods, services, or amenities. But I don't see that in here. Is that it?
Yes, that's in the plan. I didn't call it out, but it is in the plan. I may have to have one of our staff to specifically tell me where that is, but we did adopt the plan to reflect that.
Yeah, if somebody could point out where that is specifically, because it's not reflected in the actual summary of the goal itself. So, yeah, I'd like to know where that is. Thank you.
It's in. We'll get.
It's in there. We did not reflect it in the goal. We made a modification to the goal itself, but the goal, it's a big picture goal, but it's in the document itself.
Okay. I mean,
So
I think that conversation was foundational, or the goal was foundational to the conversation we're having, but that might be splitting hairs. So I'll look for it to be pointed out specifically. Thank you.
Okay, we'll get that. All right.
It's on page 71 of the revised document in the right-hand corner.
All right.
Policy 1.6, where it says integrate emerging technologies and future innovations in planning, policy, and infrastructure investment to facilitate delivery of goods and services directly to residents and businesses.
I've got you, Mr. Bakari. Follow.
Just directly respond to that very quickly.
Well, I want to make sure that Mr. Eggleston is okay. Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, I mean, it's very crystal clear what we brought forward and voted on, which was to change the goal number 1 of 10-minute neighborhoods, to very simply say access to the amenity is the goal, not necessarily a walk or bike ride or trip there. A very simple ask that was crystal clear. And what was changed? Added language of not all neighborhoods are expected to include every essential amenity, good, or service, but every resident should have access within a half-mile walk or a 2-mile bike or transit trip. So that was what was added. One, that sentence contradicts itself. And then two, it has nothing to do with what we specifically said there. So adding some in public investment, an asterisk piece that says, oh, well, innovations that we don't know about, all they had to do was one simple thing, which was not just say you have to walk or ride a bike to it. You just have to have access to it. And they couldn't do that.
All right, Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mayor. I won't restate everything I've said. You'll be grateful to know. But I do think that the way this is being done kind of buries in process some big questions. I think that we had a very robust public conversation about some of the principal features of this plan, and I don't recognize that anything in this draft is importantly different from what we got before. I see language changes, and I see some softening qualifications being inserted, but it still doesn't look to me like the product of the robust conversation that we had when we had our hearing, and we heard things about single family, we heard points about the 10-minute neighborhoods. So, I mean, maybe Mr. Jaoba, I'd put it to you this way. What do you think, if any, are the material changes that are different from this, the way this plan originated, that are in here now? How has this plan actually been modified as a result of 600 public comments and the discussion we had here? And I don't mean, okay, we've got this language here and so on, but is there any important feature of this plan that isn't the same as it was when it was first written?
I'll say that this plan is not different, but it's better as a result of some of the comments that were made and that were included. For example, let's cite the goal number 1 on 10-minute neighborhood. One of the things we heard clearly from the community and even from some of yourselves is that it may not be possible everywhere. For example, we did not have it, specify half a mile or a mile away from bike. So those were specific. That was not there with the first draft. Another thing that wasn't there in the first draft, obviously, is the policy on housing diversity. I think that in the first draft, we had a different language from what you have in the recommended draft. If you look at I believe it's goal number 7 on integrated natural and built environment, you'll see a lot of changes that were made referencing connection of land use to strategy energy action plan and the tree canopy action plan. So there's a number of things there, because when we were taking some of those comments into consideration, we were also consulting with our Unified Development Ordinance team as well to make sure that some of these things that are being said can easily be, regulations can be developed around implementing them. And finally, I think you had a conversation last week with regards to block lengths and also consideration for what developers had brought up. We made that change to go from 1,000 to 1,500, but also knowing that there's some flexibility that can be provided during the Unified Development Ordinance phase. And there were a few other things, I believe, that the development industry asked for: clarity on definition of micromobility, define what active ground space will be. Some of those things were cleared up. That active ground space is not just retail, because that was one concern that we had from them. So I don't have the plan itself in front of me, but I can tell you that there were a lot of, which is why we had it in track changes, a lot of changes there to actually make it, I would say, better. But we were not rewriting the plan.
So Mr. Jaoba, I agree with you that the changes represent refinements and represent an improvement on the plan as originally conceived, but some of the issues about the legalities, about the conflicting priorities, about, for example, whether or not all of the things that we say about trees can be achieved without having an impact on the cost of housing that defeats the purpose of the plan. I mean, there are some really basic questions that I feel have been just skirted in this process, and we have kind of looked at language changes, and we've looked at softening something here or there because, yeah, we don't want to kind of suggest that we're going to break the law, so we recognize that this, but it still, in my mind, and what concerns me is it still amounts to a vision that kind of contradicts itself. I think if we try to achieve all the goals we have for trees and sidewalks and other things, it's going to be very hard also to realize benefits in terms of housing costs. And I'll mention again, as I said before, this whole process has not included any data. We have had data about the outreach to the community and lots of numbers there about look how much they like it, which frankly, when we got to the hearing, was not the same impression. I don't know what the rest of you thought, but I think the data that we saw about the outreach effort before we got to the hearing was not consistent with the mix of opinion that we heard at the hearing. We don't have data about what kind of housing types we have today, who owns them, what sort of mixed neighborhoods might exist today, whether there is actually heterogeneity or not in the neighborhoods. There are a lot of numbers that we could be looking at in order to satisfy ourselves about this plan. And the plan has been done, in my mind, largely on the basis of a legitimate aspiration and desire to do a good thing, which I support. And in fact, my aspiration is not different, I think, from others. But maybe I'm just a unimaginative, hard-nosed realist, and I worry about adopting a plan that could end up simply being unattainable. So why haven't we done more? And we got today, by the way, a new memo from the developer community who have been trying, I believe, legitimately, to help make this plan better, to make it more workable. I don't look upon their input as being some sort of self-serving effort to protect their own profits. I think they look at it, and they're concerned too. So I hope everybody, I won't read from it now, but I hope everybody will look at the 5 pages that we got today, the product of another review by the developers. I would have hoped that we could form more of a partnership, the way you would see when the chamber, for example, is involved, if we had a chamber, and where you get the business community excited and on board and working with us, instead of feeling that there's an adversarial relationship between the city and the people who are going to have to make this happen. It's their capital, it's their skill, it's their expertise, and we are not listening to them. And I think that's unfortunate. I will mention also, on your slide, direct at least half of public infrastructure investment over the next 20 years to the most vulnerable communities. I think applying that criterion to how we invest our investment money could be unconstitutional. It strikes me as a violation of the equal protection laws. We should be allocating our money according to where it is the most productive in the pursuit of our goals without trying to put a quota on it like that. So it's just an example, but I can tell you that a lot of people in the community see that and they think, there go my sidewalks. They're going to be putting in who knows what in these troubled areas, and I'm not going to be able to get a sidewalk. And if you look at the mix, for example, talking about numbers, if you look at the mix of how much of the money that we are spending is being contributed by the neighborhoods to whom you wish to give half of our investment versus how much comes from other places, I think it's too lopsided. I mean, I fully accept that we will put more money into the needy neighborhoods because that's why we're here. But when I look at something like that, I can easily imagine that a lot of people who write big tax checks every year feel as if their rights are not being properly represented here. What we want in the end is a harmonious community. We want a community in which we all like each other and like to live together. And one of the difficulties in my mind in this plan, and with references to segregationist tools and so on, I don't think it gets us closer to the goal of harmony and of social justice in genuine terms, where we all live together and respect each other. I think this inflames the conversation. And this is what troubles me about it. I mean, having a plan that's not going to do what it says it's going to do for the people that it's supposed to help, and in the process irritates and inflames others. I just don't understand how that's a good way to get us closer to being the kind of city we want to be. And I will be looking for legal advice about whether we can put a quota on our investment like that and not open ourselves up to a lawsuit. But it's impossible to kind of go over all of the issues we've talked about. The CBAs and Displacement Commission do not have the legal authority to provide the assurances that we're suggesting they will, that no gentrification can occur. They just do not have the power because the only power that exists is our ability in a conditional rezoning process to say no to the land use. But once you go to CBAs, we've heard about what their applications are and what kind of authority can be behind them. And essentially, you need to have either public investment or you need, excuse me, you need to have another basis. But we cannot tell developers, you must accommodate the wishes of some unspecified population near your proposal before you will get permission to use the land that way. We just can't legally do that. And the Displacement Commission, too, what kind of delegated authority will it have that prevents the installation of high-cost duplexes and triplexes into vulnerable neighborhoods today? So I'm sorry to be such an angry naysayer, because this should be a happy time for us. We should be celebrating this plan, and I'm sure some of us look forward to doing exactly that. I'm just troubled by the fact that I really don't think we are being fair to the people that are probably the most hopeful because of this. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Newton.
Yes, so I wanted to draw our attention to Goal 8, which is the economic opportunity goal. I was under the impression that the language that I had put forth a couple of weeks ago via email would be considered by the council for inclusion in the document. I don't want to take anything away from what has been changed, because I agree with the new language. It's just, it's not the language that I was proposing. And I was under the impression after our last conversation that it would come back before the council for consideration. We did have, just to belabor the point, we did have over, roughly 6 council members that seemingly supported the original language when it was first proposed 2 weeks ago. At the same time, we had 10 council members that had voted to bring it forward for a council vote. I appreciate, so I know that, Ty, you would send an email out to us last Friday. So I do appreciate that email, and I do think it does provide clarity on the language. So to the extent that we're talking about 8.14 and workforce agreements, I appreciate our city attorney weighing in on that. And I'm not opposed to that language being excluded, but I did, wonder about whether we should have more of an emphasis on workforce development. And then again, too, I think in 8.17, I'm all on board with us including the language in worker protections, but wanted to ask about benefits, because I think that certainly we want to encourage a sustaining wage. We want to encourage worker protections, but let's face it, particularly in this day and age, benefits are really important. And then also the proposed language 8.32. And for anyone that maybe is a little bit lost here in what I'm talking about, these, if you can pull up your email, you'll see that I resent the email last week, so last Thursday, and it has these 3 proposed changes. Once again, Ty had followed up, so I thought that, with the follow-up email here, that this would put it in front of us, because now we have, at this point we have what I thought was the equivalent of staff weighing in and possibly giving some recommendations here. But then, in as much as 8.32 was concerned, we do have a new 8.32, which I like, but at the same time, it's different language, really in its entirety, from the proposed 8.32. Which apparently is consistent with our plan, goals, and city priorities. So even more reason for me to question why, we wouldn't be considering on including this language from the email I sent as well. So I say all that to ask that we actually consider the language that was proposed. So not to the exclusion of language that has now been included within the plan, because once again, I like it. But at the same time, maybe we consider some of the proposed language as well. This has been including emails, this is my 4th time I've asked this. So I want to put that out there and ask that we as a council maybe consider some of this language and come to some sort of conclusions on whether we want to add additional language to this, to Goal 8, and really more specifically language that kind of strengthens our commitments to workforce development, our city workers, and then also our apprenticeship programs.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilmember Newton. So my response to you essentially has not changed except for 8.14 in that email that I had sent. My understanding was Council was going to have a discussion today around this particular subject. And so we did not, do anything beyond what you sent us. But with 8.14, I think we talked about that today with the attorney's office. And the way we understand it is you want something that says community benefits and workforce agreement, but we cannot legally do that. And so we have to just keep workforce development in that language, but not necessarily community benefit and workforce agreement. So with that conversation that we had on 8.14, I can send something out to all of you tonight. And then if you're good with that, then we will definitely include that in the final draft that will come to you.
But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself because I didn't know if we actually have that scheduled as a conversation for us tonight. And if that's the case, then maybe I'm jumping the gun here. But I completely get where you're coming from when it comes to that language, and I would agree with that. But I'm just asking about the other proposals aside from that language.
The other one on the family sustaining wage, at the risk of being too anal here, page 132 of the plan actually defines what family sustaining wage is, and that it includes worker benefits. So we can add that in parentheses, call it out in the plan for policy 8.17. But the reason we call it family sustaining wage is because that also includes benefits. But if that's not satisfactory, there's nothing wrong in calling that out in the policy.
I'm really grateful you pointed that out because I think that answers that question. There was some additional language within 8.14 pertaining to workforce development, possibly maybe being able to be tacked on the back end of this, but really kind of the general idea being that in this concept of community benefit agreements, that we not lose sight of workforce development, certainly providing resources, so the support, development, retention of community assets and amenities, absolutely, but also just, maybe that more of that nuts and bolts kind of just workforce development as well, which I kind of view as something different, but also something that I think would be tremendously beneficial for us to explore in the concept of community benefit agreements. So once again, don't know if that's a conversation we'll be having as a council. I didn't know if this was the time for me to bring this up, but I didn't want to lose the opportunity to bring it up if it was the only time. Maybe it's not. So hopefully we do have that conversation tonight. Thumbs up?
I'm sorry. So, Mr. Newton, I think I'm looking at the page, and what I thought is that this was our first workshop, and then there was a second one that we would also have that's at the strategy session, that we would actually be at that point having some final ideas or questions before we came to the end of June. So I don't have my schedule in front of me, so I might be a little bit off in terms of our second workshop. So I think what we need to do is figure out, because obviously I think we're kind of talking and I'm not really sure that we're communicating.
Some of us might be a little lost. I
understand that. So let's try to get on top of this. Mr. Jones, next.
Mayor,
Help me.
What you have in terms of a schedule is that on June 7th, at the strategy session, that this would come back before you again. My understanding is the strategy session occurs before what's been deemed the final release.
Yes.
I do believe that this was an outstanding issue from the last discussion. And if there is an opportunity to talk about it tonight, I think it's appropriate.
I believe so.
Move
And
further today.
Do we think everyone's up to speed on this, though, too? I mean, I wouldn't want us to not have kind of an understanding of what we're talking about.
I think
But assuming we are, let's, maybe we do it.
there's an email that you sent with the materials and or the
Mayor, we cannot
information.
hear you clearly.
I'm sorry, Ms. Ajmira?
Can you move your microphone closer?
Okay, thank you. All right, so what I'm going to ask is, can we get someone to pull that email up that Mr. Newton has and make sure everybody gets a copy of it? Okay, and then we'll come back. All right, I have, actually, I have Mr. Winston next, okay? Is that okay? Can we get that done, Ms. Jackson? Okay, thank you, we'll get it up. All right, Mr. Winston.
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to make two statements just for the record. There was a statement said that we haven't seen any data. That's just incorrect. This is a data-informed plan. And for those that are watching, if you want to learn about how data was used, look at section 1.3 and learn about the equitable growth framework and all of the different data metrics that were used and that have been used and will be used to measure the effectiveness of the plan, measure equity, and all of the above. The appendices that are not in this particular version, but were in the first version, also provided a whole menu of examples of the data or the different sets of data that were used for these metrics. So this is a very, very data-informed plan, data-driven plan, and you can don't have to take my word for it. You can check for yourself. I would also just like to mention it was said about the goal of the 10-minute neighborhoods, about how integrating these emerging technologies don't fit whatever guidance. I think I would disagree with that. I think what my colleagues were getting at, yes, there might be a situation or many situations in the future where folks don't necessarily need to walk very far, maybe not far being their front door or down their driveway, but that still does completely fit the goal of creating a 10-minute neighborhood. That's probably the shortest walk that you can take, or bike ride, or however you want to go down your driveway. Some people have to drive down their driveway. But that would in fact factually fit right into that goal. And we know that we have a lot of work to do to be able to get there, to bridge the digital divide, for instance, for folks to be able to take advantage of those amenities. So I really see staff as listening to council and putting the corrections and guidance into these revisions. So great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to say, first of all, I support the plan overall, and I've said that before, and I think it's a great step forward, but I do, the revisions, I will admit, because of family events over the weekend, didn't have time to go through the whole document. But in looking at the things that were on my mind, I am glad that we revised that language about uptown density so that it is not specifying that there is a legal document attached to that goal and desire. Colleagues have mentioned the 10-minute neighborhood and including what we had agreed to include in there. Mr. Newton, I did respond to say I like what you were saying about workforce development. I will say, though, to be honest, I am struggling to fit that into this because I think we risk in some of the things that we're doing getting away from what a comprehensive vision plan is, and it's a master document to guide land use decisions and create a vision for the future. And when we try to put up too many things in the soup, sometimes you lose the flavor of the soup altogether. So I think that discussion under CBAs is a great place to have that conversation. And again, going back to the Asheville example where they had that, they took action around CBAs separate from their comprehensive vision plan. I don't know why we can't do that and talk about the things that are important to us, like workforce development. But overall, I think we just have to really make sure that we remember what we're trying to pass is a master document for the future, and not get ourselves too tied into a couple things on here in these revisions. I do agree with my colleague, Mr. Driggs. I did not see that comment at first about directing at least half of public infrastructure investment over the next 20 years to the most vulnerable communities, especially within the populations vulnerable to displacement overlay. That just took me by surprise because I'm not sure how we're defining all of that. If we're talking about wanting to give more people access to high opportunity neighborhoods, wouldn't we want to be investing in those neighborhoods in a way that gave people more access? Again, I go back to our bus system and having a better public transportation system to allow people to work and live in different areas. It's how we use our housing trust fund. And so I actually find that statement in the revision to be rather limiting. And I don't know that really stays with the spirit of developing a master plan for land use. So, I'm struggling with that particular revision, the comment in that for that revision. But otherwise, that's it for my comments. I absolutely support the overall intent of the plan.
All right. Are there any other of the folks on virtual that would like to speak?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Ms. Ajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I just want to thank our planning staff and the entire team for working on this. I did have an opportunity to go over some of the changes that council had approved, and majority of the questions and concerns that council had that had more than 5 council member support have been incorporated. I did receive, I think many of us received a memo from Tim Sidema earlier today with specific questions and asks. Mr. Jayoba, you may not have had an opportunity to respond to those, but I didn't see that you were copied in that email. Do you have a copy of those concerns that Tim Sidema and others had raised?
Tonight is the first time I'm hearing about it, and I checked with my staff, and we don't have it either.
Okay, so I'll forward it to you, but I think
It came at 4:07, Ms. Ajmira, so I don't know that everybody, you have it. I don't know that everybody else has it yet, but we can look for it.
Yes, I'll forward it to Mr. Jayoba.
Yeah.
If you could.
Thank you.
If you could respond to those comments and questions, that would be great. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on the virtual meeting? Okay. All right, Mr. Bakari.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Phipps.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, when we get documents that's containing a host of questions, I would hope, between now and the time that we vote, that they will be, addressed or looked at, because some of the questions that have been presented in some of those correspondence have been brought up here, like the height concerns and things. But I'm thinking that there might be others, even the block lengths for industrial. I mean, those were mentioned in some of those documents. So I want to make sure that we've looked at those and reviewed them and opined on them in a way such that that there would be some response and to make sure that there won't be any unintended consequences when the plan is voted on, that maybe some of these things had not been addressed in a satisfactory manner. So that's what I hope that we would undertake and make sure that there are not any other items that need to be brought forth for more clarity and response. So, I look forward to talking to the planning director to see how we incorporated or looked at some of those things. I mean, it was a host of them. One of them, 13 pages, this one 5 pages. So I just want to make sure that that's done as we move forward. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right. Mr. Bakari.
Thank you. I'll start with a question for Mr. Attorney or someone on your staff, and this is the same question I posed to you this afternoon. Obviously, knowing that there's a lot of underlying detail, so I'll preface it as saying, from your guys' quick analysis that you've done on where we are in 2.1, and not like the art of the possible with the practical implementation down the road, but just now from a legal view, when you see the statement, allow duplex and triplex housing units in all place types where single-family housing is allowed, regardless of how mapping works and all of those things, is there any reason for us not to interpret this as in, well, everything's going to have a place type, and where all single-family housing is allowed is in a place type, therefore, duplexes and triplexes being allowed everywhere? It's the exact same thing as saying all lots, where we were before, versus now saying this.
Thank you for your question. I've spoken with Ms. Hagler-Gray, and I'll let her take the first attempt at that answer, if you wouldn't mind, Tori.
Please.
Mr. Bakari, yes, that's our understanding, is that this language informs the public that there will be an intermediate step between the adoption of the comp plan and the implementation step with the UDO, so that place typing will take place after this, but it won't change the place types that you were going to adopt, which are N1 and N2, and will allow duplexes and triplexes on single-family lots.
Thank you. So, I mean, that should be crystal clear to everyone, and I'll say it in another way. I'll say it the way my colleague, Councilmember Winston, has said it several times, and I haven't fully comprehended it until seeing this draft, which is, if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C. So it's very crystal clear. This is fancy footwork in saying all lots which the community rose up against and put pressure, and now we've said all place types, which means the same thing. It literally means the same thing. So I'll just end my comments. I mean, we have been debating this and fighting this and arguing this for months now, and it seems like people aren't listening to logic. They're holed up in their positions. So I will just, at the end of my rope on this one, address my final comments to the community. And this is to you, the citizens of Charlotte. It's up to you now. Everyone's positions have been made here. If you're paying attention, it's crystal clear. So now it is up to you to ask the questions of this council over the next couple weeks, because there is no more. You see what's before you. This is it. And if you do not speak up and ask your questions, this is what will be approved. Some of the questions you should be asking simply are, what analysis went in to this plan stating things like 50% of capital investments going forward over 20 years need to go towards specific parts of town? That's an awful round number. It doesn't seem like it has a lot of analysis behind it. Why did that happen? What other departments were part of that? Here's more questions. Why have you decided to cherry pick a set of tactical tools in this plan that you don't understand how they will even work, yet you've left others off? Other tacticals you left off, you should be asking the questions of, why wouldn't you put things in like state tax credits for affordable housing if we're picking and choosing tactical things that are in here? Other questions. Why do you continue to include community benefit agreements in the plan, citing how they will enable communities to get daycares and grocery stores when we know this isn't the case? If you want to know what Councilmember Newton was talking about and asking for us to have a conversation earlier, it was literally, how are those things going to work? And can we put a little meat around them now? And the punchline, even though he and I probably fall on opposite sides of that issue, we're actually united because no one will talk about it. They just want us to jam it in this plan. So you have to ask those questions. You have to ask the questions of, did you actually change the approach to abolish single-family zoning, or did you just change the words lots to place types, and it's going to result in the exact same thing? For the council members who oppose the original language and now support the plan, what has changed? You need to also ask, why are we so opposed to doing a cost-benefit analysis on what the specifics of this plan will do for affordable housing? And then finally, we need to ask the question, why are we not allowing a public hearing for you to come speak to us again as we work to jam this thing through? An opportunity for you to come tell us what you think about this draft that we've just arrived at. So remember, citizens of Charlotte, that's who I'm speaking to now because it's in your hands at this point. We are at a narrow 6-5 vote on the most fundamental parts of this plan to pass. And again, a comp plan is designed to convene and unite this community. And the only unity that exists right now in this whole city is the development community, and they're against the plan. So this council is not being close to united on this. It's 6-5, and it is not divided on party or race lines. The only real division is that the 5 of us that are opposed to it in this form are district reps. That should tell you something. So ask your questions. It's up to you now. That's it. And 6-5 is a very narrow margin that you can have an influence on with one very simple question, which is, what's the rush? Thank you.
Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson? Can we check on? Oh.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you, Mayor. I just wanted to ask a question about the plan being divided into 3 volumes. I see that language is discussed on several times throughout the plan, but I wanted to clarify that it's documented that the council will vote before each volume is adopted. So can you tell me, Taiwo, if that's going to be defined or documented so that we have that information in writing? Thank you.
Councilman Johnson, thank you. The plan is streamlined into 3 different deliverables, those 3 volumes. The first volume is the policy, big ideas, the goals, and the different programs and projects. That's what we propose that council should adopt, because that's really what's going to guide the unified, first of all, the place types mapping and the unified development ordinance. Without that, we cannot go into those 2 steps. The second volume is the implementation strategy. We are not proposing that council should adopt that, but that's just a proposal. Again, because that's the one you're going to see over and over. Council can make a decision that you want to adopt it. We have no problem with that. What I think it's more important with that implementation strategy is that you want to see it so that nobody goes away and start doing something else without council oversight. So we get that. However we choose to do that, whether through adoption or coming back to you over and over, we're fine with that. The last volume is the appendix. That's where you have the acknowledgements, for the most part, of people and the different manuals. You do not need to adopt that. So it's really the first volume, and then you can decide and give us guidance as to how you want us to approach the second volume, whether through adoption or coming back to you at every point in time.
Okay, this is starting to feel like Groundhog Day. We've spent, it feels like 20 hours discussing on what what changes we want to see. And we talked about the adopting of each volume. We talked about that for a while, or several times throughout the last few meetings when we had straw votes, which is a whole nother issue I'd like to discuss at a later time. So Councilmember Newton, if I understand him correctly, what he was requesting has not been updated. 2.1, what Councilmember Watlington requested, that is not designed the way, according to her understanding. And I know for certain what we talked about the adoption policy. I'm concerned that council's spending a lot of time on this, communicating to the staff what we're wanting in the plan, and it's just not being implemented. Mr. Jones, I would speak to you about this at this point. We've asked if someone needs to revisit some of the suggestions that we've made over the last few meetings. I would ask that be compared with the revisions, because it's not. I don't feel like council is getting what we are asking for. It's the same document, but for fields, like the same document with a few words changed, even the place type to lot size. I mean, and so we really, really need to be heard, and the changes to be, or the revisions need to be made, especially this one. I can speak for myself on this one. It was my understanding that the straw vote, we passed this, and I don't know why that there would have been any confusion on that. So if you need to look at the video last week, it really was my understanding that we communicated that we wanted to adopt each volume. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I just need some help on this, how 3 council members feel like they're, what we understood or what we requested has not been updated in the plan. Thank you.
So thank you, Councilmember Johnson. So Taiwo was mentioning the prerogative of the council. So absolutely, Volume 1, Volume 2, if you want to vote on those, absolutely. If you want to vote on an appendix that has acknowledgments, absolutely, you can do that. In terms of what's happening in this revision, and I'll try to do it very quickly, is that the council started off with committees, and the committees took certain items, and the revision to 2.1 actually came out of a committee. And that was voted on, I think, 8-3, and put in the plan. And so I think that is consistent with the words that came out of that committee. In terms of some of the changes to this document, well, first of all, Councilmember Driggs, I agree with you in the sense of, bringing the city together and having collaboration and working through all of this. I think that's exactly what we want. We all should aspire to have. In terms of a major rewrite, basically the discussions with the council were around what came out of the committees and those 19 items that were for a straw vote and some other items that were informational. So things outside of that from the council discussion would not be in this. So again, if you want to vote on the 3 volumes, yes. In terms of what came out of the council discussion, it really was a part of the straw votes as well as the committees. But again, we stand ready to take direction from the council.
Okay. I had Ms. Watlington next. And
I was just going to ask if we could get a copy of those straw votes that we voted on with the wording that we voted on.
Yes.
So that we can compare it side by side to the revised plan. Thank you. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I just want to say in particular to 2.1, and I think I wrote this a couple of weeks ago in my email, my intent to changing to place types was to preserve exactly, I believe, what you asked about on the 10th, was will we have an option between single exclusive or single family exclusive and something flexible. So the original intent of my place type wording was absolutely to preserve that option. But like that vote has happened, and okay, we've done a straw vote. We have not voted on the plan. So obviously that is until council decides that that's what we want to do officially, then it's a discussion. But I just wanted to make that clear. But I think that speaks to some of what I'm hearing around the table. And I feel like this could be a lot. I don't think this has to be difficult in terms of this is what we said, let's bring it back. So if there is a way that we can
figure that piece out, where the breakdown is that we all, not all, but the majority of us are walking away with the impression that something's going to look different, and then maybe it doesn't look quite exactly like we thought it was. I think that's what I'm hearing from folks, whether it's 2.1 or block length or whatever it is. And I'll leave that there.
Mayor, members of council, I think that's fair in terms of trying to have a matrix, if you will, about what was put in the document, especially from the council's deliberations, and getting a better understanding of that, what's in here, if that was the intent of council. I don't disagree with you at all.
So can we get this done prior to, I know it's a holiday weekend, but it's probably good because that may be the time that some of us have to read. And if we could get that as quickly as possible, I think that makes a big difference as well, Mr. Jones. All right.
So I just would like to, I think maybe where the confusion is could be this. I tried to explain it last week, but let me try again. So there are 3 parts to the comprehensive plan. The volume 1, which is the policy, which is sections 1 to 3 of what you had in the old document. The volume 2 is the section 4 in the old document, which is your implementation strategy. And the volume 3 is where you have the appendices, the acknowledgement. However, that's just the 3 parts to the comprehensive plan. The process itself also has 3 parts, and I believe that that's what you were talking about. After the comprehensive plan is done, you will still have an opportunity to adopt the place types mapping, but not until February of 2022. And council will still have the opportunity to also adopt the Unified Development Ordinance spring of 2022. So there are 3 parts to the plan, and there are 3 parts to the process. Like the manager said, if you want to adopt all the 3 volumes of the plan, that's fine, including the appendices and the acknowledgement, that's okay. But we're just trying to separate those because you had asked us to bring back a streamlined document. Hence the reason for setting apart the acknowledgement, the appendices, the place types manual, so that you only focus in volume 1 on policy, big ideas, goals, programs, and projects. Those are the ones that will drive the place types and the UDO. Without them, we cannot progress into those areas. Your decision about the implementation strategy as well as the appendices, but this is different from the place types itself, which we will still adopt next year. So I don't know if that's what Councilmember Johnson is saying, but we will go back and review. But we know that everything we heard from you, we, as much as possible, working with constituent services, made sure that we were looking at everything as to the best of our ability to have what you have in front of you.
All right, Mr. Driggs.
I would just say very briefly, I wish we would all consider that we're divided almost right down the middle on probably the most prominent feature of this plan. It's not a very satisfactory outcome. It would be nice if we could work a little more and come up with an answer that a greater majority of us felt good about. And there are ways that we can achieve the purpose of 2.1 without a meaningless wording change that will move us in the direction of liberalizing land use, diversifying land use, and so on, and not totally erase every single family neighborhood in all of Charlotte. So, as I say, I just think the fact that we're so evenly divided on this ought to be a signal to us that maybe we could work a little more and reach a greater majority. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Graham?
Are we just equally divided? Right? I mean, and I don't think the plan calls for eliminating every single-family housing development in the city. That's just a mischaracterization of the plan. And so, you know, it would be nice to have all 1 million plus citizens in Charlotte agree on the plan, that we're all in this together, that, you know, that we all agree about every aspect of the plan. I'm not sure that's realistic, and based on the performance of our council, I'm not sure it's possible for us to get 9 votes, 11 votes for it either. I think the plan is what it is, and I don't want to be a broken record, but it's aspirational. It's what we aspire to be. It's how we want to build a city. No, it won't be perfect, and no, it won't have 90% of the folks and the community behind it. I don't think that's realistic, but I think it's aspirational, and I think we can achieve it if we start, and every council member has a prerogative to see it as they want and deliver the type of presentation that they believe they should. But I don't think that it is fair to staff, nor is fair to those who believe that the plan is a document that we can work with moving forward to suggest that it's something else. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Newton.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on this one. Just bring to everyone's attention, for anyone maybe watching at home, these place types are specific in nature, and there's a lot of specifics within this plan. And so to simply say that it is purely aspirational, that I think just isn't accurate, frankly. We know that adopting the current schematic of place types is going to limit community options within the UDO mapping process. That is specific. And I would disagree, I think, with my colleague pertaining to the elimination altogether of single-family developments or single-family communities by virtue of the existence of 2.1 here in its current form. But at the same time, I think the proposal that many council members have made would not eliminate the possibility of duplexes and triplexes in single-family either. It's more of a compromise. It's what, as Councilwoman Wallington was saying, it's what's flexible, right? It allows for flexibility. It allows for more community input outside of a context where we know CBAs are not going to be applicable. And at the same time, too, it allows for protections, right, that we all can readily acknowledge exist, protections for outcomes. So adverse outcomes that we can all readily acknowledge exist in this plan. Why are we having all this conversation about non-displacement, right? Why are we talking about a non-displacement committee? It's because we can acknowledge that this plan, frankly, will accelerate gentrification, right? Why are we talking about infrastructure so much? It's because we can acknowledge that this plan and subdivision growth can accelerate units in areas that aren't, that don't have the critical infrastructure, amenities in place to support the growth. So having said that, why wouldn't we look for a way to find a middle ground, to create more options, more flexibility, right? Why wouldn't we want to have some sort of contingency to protect those areas we know could be vulnerable to the very things that we see as problems that will arise out of this plan later? That's what I've gathered from the conversation.
All right, Mr. Bakari.
I think there's probably not someone on this council that is more, frustrated with what's in this plan and how many things are in it that are just wrong, and I think they're not right. With that being said, on that far side of this, as much as I dislike those things, the broader point is we're here to try to find common ground. Right? And I am telling you right now, if we went back to the point of discussion where we agreed on two simple things. 2.1, remove all the special footwork and the different wording that's in there and bring it up to the appropriate level that we understand now, which is we as a city over the next 20 plus years are going to go after and aggressively pursue density in all ways we can, as long as we can ensure it doesn't have detrimental effects to affordability. You say that, I'm on board. And then secondarily, you replace all places that say community benefit agreements with which is a capital letter, word that means something very legally specific, and you just replace those words with community engagement. Something that is more generic, which says we don't know how any of this is going to work yet, but we value grocery stores and daycares and all of these things we've said. We all value those things. In fact, going back to that first part, I don't actually have that huge of a problem with single-family zoning being abolished. I just think it's completely unstudied, and we have no idea what it will do to affordability. So there's a chance that I could get behind that down the road if the proper analysis is done and we see what it's going to do around displacement and gentrification. However, right now, I'm not asking for us to not do that. I'm saying bring it up a notch so that's included in the scope, and let's do it. If you do those two things, CBAs to the word community engagement and 2.1 away from the specific tactical wording up to we're going to aggressively pursue density as long as we ensure affordability, despite all the other things I hate about this plan, I'll vote for it. Promise. So anyone who's looking for compromise, I right now am signing up for those two edits, and I'll move forward with everything else I hate because that's compromise. But for those of you on the other side of this who are saying, oh, well, we've changed lots to place types, and that was why I jumped on board this, I think we've made it clear tonight there is no difference. So if you were opposed to it before, you have to answer why you're not opposed to it now.
All right. Ms. Ajmira? Ms. Ajmira, can you hear us?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you, Madam Mayor. So I want to address the comments that were made by some of my colleagues in terms of displacement and infrastructure. Yes, with this plan, it could result in higher density. And hence, the majority of the council approved Infrastructure Council, which was not in the original plan, and Anti-Displacement Commission. So both of those things, I do want residents to know that we are taking infrastructure seriously, and hence there is a committee that will be in place as part of the implementation, along with the Anti-Displacement Commission, to provide recommendations on the strategies to address these issues moving forward.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Ajmira. Ms. Watlington?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, many of you know, professionally, I'm an engineer. I'm also a project manager, and I lead multi-stage initiatives. And the idea when you begin an initiative at feasibility is to converge, and you want to continue down that funnel to get more specific as you move into conceptual, as you move into project commitment. Because when people commit to something, everybody needs to be on page or on the same page about what, if I was to say the charter, or what the outcomes need to be of the particular initiative. If we're committing dollars, we need to understand what the economic impact is. As you go through design, then you start to understand more specifically, all right, exactly how much are these estimates off? There's contingency in the plan, because further down the road, we're going to mitigate that risk as we get more specific, we get more answers. As you move into startup, as you move into turnover, the idea is that you decrease risk as you go further through the process, right? And so when it comes to decision-making, sequencing, you don't want to lean in too far and commit on certain aspects before you've had the opportunity to do the analysis. And so I think as it comes to this plan, well, first of all, I think what I'm hearing in the room is that people have different definitions of plans, right? There's a vision, right? Purpose, values, principles. And I feel like that ultimately, when we say this is aspirational, is what this document is supposed to be. And we shouldn't have a whole lot of fundamental differences when it comes to our purpose, our values, and our principles. When we get down to a plan, you're talking about implementation level. You're talking about specific tasks, who owns them, what is the schedule. Those are the components of a plan. So I feel like there's an opportunity for us to really align on what we're trying to do here, because if it is truly supposed to be our vision, I think that is wonderful. As a vision, it should be, I would think that there are a lot more people that would be on the same page in regards to some things. And it sounds like there's an opportunity to go in here and really separate out. And I think that was the request of council previously, was to separate out what's aspirational versus the tactical items. And I think Councilmember Bakari said this earlier, there are some things that are tactical that I feel like are being determined ahead of the work to really understand the options. And I'm not understanding why that is happening. And so I guess that's my question for the room, is why do we feel the need to do that? Because I agree with you, Councilmember Graham, that this is a living document. The work doesn't stop after we approve it. We're going to continue to refine and do that. I think we're all on the same page in terms of that. So then why does our document not reflect that? We're choosing to make decisions here that we don't have to make today. And that's the part that I'm not I'm not understanding.
I think that's a really good question, Ms. Watlington, and I'm going to take a stab at it. Mr. Bakari said we all agree on increasing density, and we should all agree that there should be citizen engagement. I think the problem that we have, and I'm just going to speak candidly, is that people don't trust because of the history of what we've done before. And when you think about the Odell plan and what happened to Brooklyn and how the black churches weren't put back, and I know you think, oh, that's been, at least 30 years ago. Well, memories for people and systematically passed down from, think about all of us that talk about our childhood and what we learned from our parents and how we feel about how we shape life today. So I believe if compromise is available to this group, and it's important to get there, then you can't just say increased density without defining what that really means, because people don't understand it. They have their lived experiences in this town. Mr. Driggs came when Piper Glen was being built. He has a beautiful home in Piper Glen. And so that's a lived experience where everybody lives in these beautiful homes. And then there are other neighborhoods that they thought they had a beautiful home, and someone came with a bulldozer and took a front page on the Charlotte Observer and pushed it down. So these are very difficult experiences to really just say, well, we believe in increased density without some idea of what that means. And I think it's a little bit tough because perhaps many of us are trying to figure it out from where we sit today. But I think that part of this, if we want this kind of compromise, it's got to go beyond the elevation of we believe in increased density, because we don't have to believe in it because it's coming anyway. That is pretty much a fact. So that is the actual thing that we can predict from the data that we have, that the growth in the city is increasing, that housing costs are going up, the volume of housing available is getting smaller. And so these are some of the things that I think we talk about, but we don't have the tactical or even the idea of what tactical criteria we would have. When I look at this, I often think about, well, what principle am I trying to follow? So how do I define a principle around density? How do I define a principle around engagement? What does that mean? And then how do you take it places where people will believe you when they don't have that belief? And everything that everyone has said, I think, has a moment of candid discussion right now. And I think that's really an important moment to have, because I don't think we're going to get any further going up, and maybe we don't do very well when we stay down at the tactical level of what we're embracing in this plan. As you said, if we were doing this from a clean slate, which doesn't exist in a city that's living and growing like ours and has a past and a history like ours, it's just not that neat. And I wish it were. But at some point, we're going to have to decide, do we come in a different direction, and how do we do that? I'm going to say this, and I know this is but I would have never said eliminate single-family zoning. I would have said in single-family zoning, we must increase the density with duplexes and triplexes. Once we use that word eliminate, I understand. No, let me just say it. You've got to prove to me that you do it. And right now, I have no proof or validation in this community that people will do it, except on corner lots. That's all I've heard. Nobody has given us one really strong way of stating how density would be increased except on a corner lot. Now, there are a lot of blocks in Charlotte, but that's all, and that's already what we have now, and it hasn't created density. Corner lots have not created density in our building. So I don't know the answer. I just feel like it's not as neat as if I were given a problem to solve that didn't have so many known and unknown factors to it. Nobody wants to increase affordability, pricing of housing.
Right.
But it's going now.
Understood.
We all know that the price of housing is increasing now. All I can say, and I'm going to say it, I said at the beginning of this discussion, the status quo is not acceptable.
Okay.
Okay?
So I think we agree on a lot. By no means was I suggesting that we start from a a blank page. I never said that.
No, I was just
No, I
saying
got you. I just want to make sure if it was unclear
No, it
what I
wasn't.
said.
I didn't
Okay.
understand you to say that.
Okay, cool. The other piece, though, is that I agree with you that because there are so many things and a lack of trust, that's why we need to have a very regimented look. Let's start with what we agree with, and let's not lean forward on things, because just like you said, living in my neighborhood, when I hear eliminate single-family zoning, we're going to allow duplexes, I'm like, you're about to throw a whole bunch of more rental properties in my neighborhood when I already have a lack of stability. So I absolutely appreciate that from people hear things from where they are. And so I don't think the answer is to give them specifics that we haven't vetted. I think the answer is to commit to the vision. I like what you said about single family, because I think that's what everybody around the table is saying, is we want to increase density in places that were single family, not status quo. I don't think anybody wants to keep status quo. But at this point, we can agree on that. Cool. Let's go to the next step. Now let's engage the community. Before we take things off the table, because that is where you lose trust, when you say we're going to engage the community, but you've already taken the queen off the board. And so people say, well, why am I showing up when you've made the decisions that I cared about? And so I think we agree that because there's a lack of trust, we've got to be more upfront. But I also think that doesn't mean that we lean forward on specific decisions when we don't have the analysis that backs it up.
So we can have this dialogue, because I'd like to continue it. Because what I would say about that is that we have had this dialogue in many parts of this community, and they would say, why are you not taking this action? Whereas there are other parts of the community that would say, why are you taking this action?
Right.
I get that. And I understand it, but I don't think that this is going to get solved today in this room.
I agree. That's why I say we don't need to add it here
What I'm saying
yet.
is that if the council members don't get a place that they can understand that there has to be a definition around increasing density for people to be able to live in the city, and I don't know what form it takes. I'm fine if we can come to some agreement, but right now, I had a council member tell me I've got the votes to get this plan passed. And it's going to be the right plan. And we've been at this now for almost a year, and it is not passed. It is not necessarily what I hear people saying, but 6 people on this council say it's the right plan for them. And so that's just the basic reality of it. And it can go that way. But if somebody really wants to say something that's going to be different and bring it, you just can't just throw it out here at this meeting every Monday night. This is a conversation that you need to be having among yourselves, and not in a way that's confrontational and indicates anger and fear.
I think people are
people
angry
are
and
doing.
afraid because we've had this conversation 100
All
times
the
and things
time,
are not changing.
over and over and over
Right,
again.
it doesn't change. That's where the
So-
frustration comes from.
And so, I'm sorry. Did you want to talk, Mr.
Okay,
Bakari?
is it my turn?
No?
Oh, okay, I thought you just called on me. Okay, so it wasn't a calling on me. Got it, check. No, that's not what you said.
So I don't know where this is going to go from now. Actually, it's 7 o'clock. We have a council meeting, and we have a public hearing that was scheduled for 6:30, and it's 7 o'clock. What I'd like to actually say is that the staff has given you every piece of information that they can give you tonight. And Matt, I'm going to ask the question around this. If you would give just some grace, everybody's got the document that has been translated and read. I hope we'll give people time to read it, and then maybe we can come back to that as the first item on our next meeting when we discuss this, or we can do it at the end of the meeting, I think, whichever.
I did have a quick comment on the conversation. I'll make it very quick comment on the conversation from before, which I'll make very quick. I think you hit the nail on the head just now, Madam Mayor, with your language. The idea here being that, yes, I think we're all in agreement that we would be okay with more density, duplexes and triplexes in single family. The only question is that going to be everywhere? Certainly that wouldn't be the status quo, because the status quo right now is that that's not the case. It's only on corner lots. And to the contention, or to that point that, we don't know if it's going to work, well, we have been restricted today. No one's saying not to open it up, right? Not to put more duplexes and triplexes in single family. It's just a matter of saying what areas do we know
where we can identify there being adverse consequences as a result. And frankly, that could be a very small fraction, right, of the overall size of all single family throughout the city. But at the same time, I think that there are some of us that say those areas are deserving of more protections, and this one size fits all approach probably is going too far.
I don't know how you protect without protecting equally in a government.
Well, I mean, frankly, there are neighborhoods
but what I'm saying is,
that have, deed restrictions, that have resources to protect themselves, that will go out there, get the overlays, and there are others that just don't have those abilities. And unfortunately, so this is my fear, and I don't think I'm the exception to the rule on this, or I'm not alone in saying this, but my fear is that those are the communities that are going to be targeted, those are the communities that are going to be exploited, and if we don't actually carve out exceptions for those communities and we move forward with a one-size-fits-all approach, well, then we're actually not, we're going to be counterproductive in the goals that we're trying to achieve.
I understand that, but I don't know that we have unanimously agreed on that premise. So I understand what you're saying.
I'm saying your language is spot on earlier, I think.
But I'm going to tell you, I'm disagreeing with you that everybody should have, anyway, something. All right, so this is what I'm going to suggest. Let's go to our...
Excuse me, but we did not do it. I really take exception to the suggestion that we are not trusted because of what you used the term, we did it before. You said we did it before. We did not.
The city of Charlotte in this,
but
in the
not
building
us.
Across the street.
What percentage of the population of the city? May I speak, Mayor? May I speak?
Yeah.
May I speak?
Yes, you certainly may.
What percentage of the population of Charlotte today was a party to any kind of redlining or anything else? It stopped legally 50 years ago, and I just don't like to be characterized as a segregationist because I think there are values associated with single-family neighborhoods that deserve to be preserved, and I do not see the need to completely eliminate the existence of single-family zoned neighborhoods in order to further the goals of this plan. I think the intention is to declare some kind of a political victory, and it's at the expense of the quality of the plan.
Well, I really regret whenever I get into a disagreement with Mr. Driggs. I'm really sorry of that because he is one of, I think, my favorite council members. No neglect to the rest of you guys. But when I say that, I really speak in the context. I've been here since 1969, and I watched in this building as people made these decisions, and a bulldozer did come down with a white guy in a suit tearing down a neighborhood. So it's kind of hard for me to forget about those things. And so I'm not calling we in terms of we, Ed and Julie and Vi, but we as a city, we did impact and make decisions. There was a study done in the late 70s that showed that we didn't build infrastructure where it was most needed on the west side. And the city manager commissioned the study. And so when you start thinking about that, I don't mean it in the context, I think every one of us has gotten to a place that we understand this country's on a path. And it's a path that I think is going in the right direction. And I think everyone here has proven more times than not that they are ready to look at the issue of equity and inclusion. I mean, our values are equity and inclusion and welcoming diversity. So I understand that. So if I say we, please forgive me for the we in the context of historical perspective. That's all I ask. And I promise you it won't be because you're being pegged as someone that did this. You were probably in Germany driving in a convertible, having a nice time and a good life. Okay. All right, so we're going to go to our business meeting now and come back at the end of this. I think the public has gotten accustomed to us doing that right now. All right, so the next item that we have on our agenda is the consent items 19 through 44, which may be considered in one motion because we had no request to change or remove any item.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Ms. Eisel?
Yes.
Ms. Sajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham? That passes unanimously. Tonight, via our virtual meeting, we have several members of the Charlotte Water Advisory Committee joining us for a joint public hearing. I'd like to acknowledge that the committee chair, Dorian Carter, is on the call, along with committee members. I hope you're still on the call. It's been a while. Along with committee members Barbara Blue Weiss, I'm sorry, I'm doing this, Bill Cornett, Leslie Jones, and Barry Webb. Thank you for joining us today. And now we're going to open the public hearing on the Charlotte Water Revenue Manual revisions. Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers? No, ma'am. We have no speakers. And so if
Motion
there...
to close the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Eggleston.
Second.
Is there a motion to approve the closing of the public hearing? All right, we'll start with Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham? All right, the next item we have is the city manager's report.
Mayor, members of council, we have, the only item I have is the 30-day memo, and I believe it's at your desk. So what we have is what you've had before in terms of the budget straw votes this Wednesday, the council strategy session on June 7th, which, as we talked about tonight, there'll be another discussion on the 2040 comprehensive plan. And then on the 14th, we have the municipal service district's annual updates, which comes to the council once a year. Pam talked a bit about the Housing Trust Fund, the 4% selection coming back to you. We had a discussion last week about city-owned sites, so we'll give you a preview of where we are for the city-owned sites for affordable housing. And then we have scheduled for the 21st the vote on the 2040 comprehensive plan. And then on the 28th, I know it went a couple extra days past 30, but there are two items that I said that we would get before you before the July break, and that is the Transformational Mobility Network update, as well as our first discussion with you about the American Rescue Plan Act. That's would be an update, and we do have, as I've mentioned before, members from my team, the county manager's team, and the superintendent's team working together to see how we can collaborate on those funds. That's my update.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we're going to go to our public forum, and we have four speakers. Mr. Winston?
I have a question for the manager, for the manager's report, if I may.
Yes, please.
I would like, Mr. Jones, I'd like for you and Mr. Baker to get together. I was actually watching the county commissioners meeting last week, and their attorney, they had a discussion that might impact us regarding open meetings, virtual meetings, post the removal of the governor's emergency order. The county attorney believed that there is no legal protection for board members' vote to be counted if there is no emergency order in place. I know we have changed the rules to allow for us to remain virtual indefinitely, but since we have some pretty important votes coming up in June, I wouldn't want us to be caught flat-footed by the potential of virtual members not being counted. So I think we really need to know going into June with anticipating there not being an emergency order statewide, how we should be guided to handle upcoming votes.
Okay, so we have referred that to the committee, and Mr. Driggs, do you know if you're all set to have a meeting on the policy of meetings and open attendance at meetings, and is Mr. Baker engaged in this conversation with the county attorney?
I don't think we have a date yet. We know it's near term. We need to do it soon.
Well, we need to do it before June, the first meeting in June.
Okay, very soon.
Yeah, very, very soon, like tomorrow maybe. I think that this is becoming more of an issue about the emergency order and what flexibility we have. Thanks for bringing that up, Mr. Winston. The deadline is really something that we need to be prepared for.
Yeah, yes, Mayor.
Okay, so maybe you can have a virtual meeting first and then after that decide. So.
We'll put something together quickly.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we're going to our Mr. Bakari, yes.
Mr. Manager, question on your memo. Do you think it could be a good idea for us, given we're talking about the comp plan so much and it's evolving, for us to hear from the community in a public hearing now that we've got this new thing before we vote on it somewhere in the schedule? And how can we go about setting those wheels in motion?
So I guess I would have to defer to the city attorney about rules around public hearings after having a public hearing.
Yeah, I asked, Tari just asked if she needed to stay, and I said no. But let me get some information, and I'll get right back to the group as quickly as I can.
Okay, we'll get back.
Because my only point would be whether that rule allows for it or not, I think we could argue there are substantial differences or lack thereof differences that have now been interpreted that hearing from the community, I think, would be warranted.
All right. Now we're going to go to our public forum, and we have 4 speakers tonight, and each speaker will have 3 minutes. The first speaker is Nada Maragani.
Madam Mayor, Maragani is not on the call.
All right, thank you. Our next speaker that signed up is Cameron Pruitt. Mr. Pruitt?
Mr. Pruitt is not on the call.
All right, our next speaker is Melba Evans.
Ms. Evans indicated that they will send their remarks via email, and they are not on the call.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. You must have been watching us earlier. All right, our next speaker is Pamela Grundy. Ms. Grundy, I see
Hello?
you. Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
I am on the call.
Ma'am?
And I have enjoyed listening to what you have to say. You can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. I'm speaking to history, and I think really relates very effectively to what the mayor said about issues of trust and particularly issues of rhetoric and reality. I thought those were very thoughtful. 2 weeks ago, a city resolution proclaimed May 20th to 24th as Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence Week. Now, it's clear to everyone that the Declaration's most famous words, "We do hereby declare ourselves a free and independent people," were not meant to apply to the many people of African descent enslaved in Mecklenburg County on May 20th, 1775, the day the Declaration is said to have been signed. Let's fast forward to May 20th, 1867. Charlotte's newly emancipated African Americans seized the spirit of the Declaration, choosing Meckdeck Day to officially form their first political organization and lauding the date as, quote, connected to liberty and the political equality of man. If Charlotte's white leaders had welcomed them with open arms, we could have had the most marvelous May 20th celebration this week, one that celebrated the 1775 event and the 1867 event and the steady expansion of freedom. But of course, as we all know, that didn't happen. So I'm going to fast forward again to 1963. Almost 100 years after emancipation, after the end of the Civil War, it still made sense for activist Reginald Hawkins to choose May 20th for a civil rights march and to use the contradictions in the Declaration's promise of liberty and the reality of oppression for African Americans to underscore his message of ongoing struggle, quote, there is no freedom as long as all of us are not free. Given the current, often contentious efforts to address the full realities of this nation's history, which have had a profound effect on the situation we face today, if the city is to declare a Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence Week next year, It should commemorate not simply the events of 1775, but also the long struggle waged by Mecklenburg County's African Americans, along with many others, to also become a, quote, free and independent people. I urge everyone who's listening to read the articles on the subject in the May 19th issue of the Queen City Nerve, and I thank you very much for your time.
We will certainly take that in consideration before our next year's request to look at MECDEC Day. Thank you very much. Okay. That's the end of our public forum. And so the next item on our agenda is the item number 11, appropriating funds for adopt a budget ordinance appropriating $105,790. I'm sorry. Item 10. I'm sorry. Thank you. All right. The next item is item 10, approve amendments to the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 5, Article 2, Regulation of Non-Residential Buildings and Structures. We've had a presentation on this, and they've explained the conversations that they've had with the community, and so I guess the question is, do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion to approve and a second. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing no discussion. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham? The next item is item 11, adopt a budget ordinance appropriating $105,793.60 in solar panel system rebate and Smart Saver incentive program funds from Duke Energy to the General Capital Fund Projects Fund. Is there
Motion to
any?
adopt.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing no discussion, I'll begin the roll call vote. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
All right. The next item is 12, adopt the budget ordinance appropriating $302,500 in private property owner funds for storm drainage improvements to the Stormwater Capital Projects Fund. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion. Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yep.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
All right. Item 13 has two actions. Adopt a resolution ratifying a land exchange agreement with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education, and B, authorize the city manager as designee to negotiate and execute all necessary documents to complete the transactions in conformity herewith. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll start with our vote. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
All right. The next item is item 14, an interlocal agreement for sanitary sewer and greenway improvements, adopting a resolution ratifying the interlocal agreement with Atrium Health in Mecklenburg County for those same improvements. Do I have a motion?
Adopt. Motion to adopt.
Second.
And a second. Thank you. All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yep.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
All right. The next item is 15, as two actions. A, adopt a resolution ratifying an interlocal agreement with the town of Cornelius for construction of water and sewer line relocations, adjustments, and improvements. And B, authorize the city manager to approve the reimbursement request for the actual cost of the utility
Move to
construction.
adopt and authorize?
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington? Yes. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yep.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
The next item is a two-part item. A, adopt a budget ordinance appropriating $73,135 in private development funds for traffic signal installations and improvements to the General Capital Projects Fund. B, adopt a budget ordinance appropriating $18,500 in supplemental developer funds for the same improvements.
Move to adopt A and B?
All right, Mr. Driggs made the motion. Second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yep.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes, sirree.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
All right. The next item is item 17, two items in this motion. First, adopt a resolution ratifying interlocal agreements to reimburse the City of Charlotte for the development and maintenance of the Metroliner Regional Travel Demand Model for a term of 5 years, along with the following governments: Concord, Gastonia, and Rock Hill. B, adopt a resolution authorizing the manager to negotiate. Okay, we're going to try to find my language here. To negotiate and execute municipal agreements to reimburse the City of Charlotte for the development and maintenance of the travel model for a term of 5 years with the following state agencies: North Carolina and South Carolina Departments of Transportation. C, authorize the manager to amend the agreements consistent with the purpose for which the agreements are approved.
Motion to adopt and authorize.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? I think that the Transportation Committee was on for at least an hour and a half or two, and they talked about this kind of work in the demand model. So, Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yep.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Okay, the next item is item 18, adopt a resolution authorizing and approving the execution of an installment financing contract and an amount not to exceed $200 million to refund outstanding 2008A certificates of participation and 2015D Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act financing. Do I have a motion?
So moved?
All right, a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
I believe that is the end of our business agenda, and I don't have any other items on the, I'm sorry, Madam Clerk? We have a closed session, that's correct. Let's go back and let's do that. Are you ready, Mr. Baker? If
I
you'll
am.
read the motion, then we'll have someone move it and second it.
Certainly. I need a
No
motion to go
packing
into
up.
closed session pursuant to GS 143-318-11A3 to consult with the city attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the city council in the matter of Habershaw versus City of Charlotte.
All right.
So moved?
Mr. Driggs and Ms. Watlington. All right. Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham? Okay, I have a question, and I don't know how, let me ask. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I want to make a couple of thoughts that I have. I think that as we're sitting here, minds are not changing, and thoughts are not getting where we need to be. And I guess the real question I'd like for you to think about is if you really believe that there is a way to go about this that would perhaps get us to a place that's beyond what I see, what we think we're doing. And I really want to say, I think on this 2040 plan, it's either 6.5 or 6.5, up or down. And right now, and if you believe that there ought to be some way to move that ball, I thought that's what we were trying to do the last 4 to 6 weeks, and I didn't see it happening. I had very few conversations that were around the idea of how to pull something together. It was kind of like, this is what we're doing and this is what we're doing. And I guess the real question is that we ought to make a decision, and I'm going to suggest that we actually have some small group meetings with each other. And if you choose to attend, that you come because you're willing to figure out something that gets you and a person that's not in the same place that you are to a place that you can come out with agreeing on both of you can agree on the same thing, if that makes sense. Now, I don't know if that's possible, but that's the only way I see us going from these meetings where we're just, once again, saying the same things, unless somebody is changing their mind. And I don't know how we get as a council, because our business is public, except to have these kind of council one-on-one or one-on-three discussions. So with that, I'd like to have you think about where this is going, no matter which side you're on, and then I wanted to recognize Mr. Eggleston.
So I think we got most everybody back.
No. I think
I'm going to wait till, yeah, I think she's
okay, well,
headed
we can
back.
wait.
But I have an idea for how I think we can move forward, and as one of the people with some very clear objections, I want to see what Ms. Watlington's thoughts are on this as well. But I think what Mr. Bakari said earlier could be, and I don't mean those specific points, but I mean the strategy he's laid out as far as what does it take for someone who's a no vote to be a yes vote, I think is a conversation worth having, because I do think that this plan will be more widely accepted and embraced by the community if there are more than just 6 people voting on it. I think it'd be a shame, and if it has to pass with 6 votes, it has to pass with 6 votes. But I don't think, we've been having discussions where people have said changes they want to see, but at no point has anybody been asked, would that change get you to a yes vote?
Yeah.
And I think that if, and again, it's up to each council member, but if people who are currently in a spot, and there seem to be 5 probably, that they don't think they can support the plan, we're comfortable and willing to do what Mr. Bakari did, and I would suggest that those meetings be individual meetings with each council member, the manager, and the planning director, and lay out specifics of if you made A, B, and C changes, as Mr. Bakari put forward for his own perspective, then I could be a yes vote. And I think if you compile those things and look at them, there would likely be some on that list that might turn some of the yes votes to no votes if the change was made. So that obviously would have to be considered. But there would also probably be things that maybe the people who are currently in the yes column would think were reasonable compromises. And so to me, if that process, if people who are no's are willing to, and frankly, I'm currently in everyone's 6-5 prediction being counted in the yes column. That doesn't mean that I don't think there are things in here that should be changed. I've made clear some of those last week. So I'm not saying that I don't think anything needs to be changed from this draft, and I would imagine other people who are leaning towards yes would feel the same as well. So to me, having those very explicit items laid out by each individual council member to the manager and the planning director could be the path to say there is a way for us to get to 7 or 8 or 9 votes. There's probably, to Mr. Graham's point, not a way to get to 11, but I do think it would have a lot more strength and weight to move this thing forward with a larger majority of council than just a 6-5. And that to me would be the only path forward, is people have to be willing to say, if you make these changes, I will vote for it. Because to date, they have said, I'd like to see these changes made, but they've not then indicated that changes the way they feel about the plan.
That's a great point, Mr. Eggleston. It really is about, is someone willing to change their vote? And so I think that's where we stand.
And I guess just to put a bow on that, if I can, there will undoubtedly be some members of council that put forward things and say, this is what it would take for me to be a yes. And we can identify some of those things potentially as just not realistic, because it would lose too many votes in the other direction, or there's just not the will on council to do it. And I think we can call a spade on those things too and say, that's not going to happen. So if that's required for you to be a yes, then we just have to accept the fact that you're going to be a no.
Right. Okay. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
I was going to have the same comments as Mr. Eggleston, more or less, that I have said all along, I was hoping that we could get to a place where council members would say what they do want instead of what they don't want. I think there's a couple important things, though, that we have to point out, is that when we talk about community, the community doesn't support this. We have to acknowledge that not everybody has the same constituent base. So it's hard to think that we're going to come to an agreement with another council member when they are representing that everybody feels one way, and then somebody else is representing that everybody feels a different way. So I'm on board to have discussions with my colleagues if we can all accept that we all have different constituents. And that, in fact, the one thing we should be able to agree on is there's a lot of different opinions in the community about this issue. The second thing is that we've got to stop saying we are asking to keep single-family zoning only designations. We don't have it now.
I know.
R3 allows duplexes. So just by the fact, I don't care if there's a couple of corners and that's it, it allows duplexes. So we would have to create a single-family housing designation to get what some folks say they want in order to pass the plan. And if that's what you want to do, then let's talk about that. But let's not say we have to retain what we have, because that's what's making the community's hair on fire, is they think we're taking something away from them that they currently have now. Absolutely, a lot of those neighborhoods do not use those corner lots for duplexes. Why not? I don't know. Are those lots more valuable than the lot next door? I don't think so. So there doesn't seem to be a market value issue, and I agree, we should figure that out why. But let's also start from that standpoint of what we're really talking about is how do you take those predominantly single-family zones and find a way to add more duplexes and triplexes. This should just be a market issue. We're never going to agree on the cultural differences that have some people feeling really strongly about where they are. That's something that we all have to work on ourselves. But we have to be talking about how to get more duplexes and triplexes into currently predominant single-family zoning districts. And then the last thing is, again, CBAs, completely agree. Don't lock us into something that doesn't have any definition behind it. I'd support the idea of CBAs. But again, you can do that without locking us into that. Put it all small c, small b. Nobody's lost anything through that. And as far as that 50 million, the 50% or more, I apologize. I have to go back and look at that one. Because again, what does that mean? We don't even know what that means. It doesn't mean we can't continue to have those discussions. So absolutely, I'm on board to talk to my colleagues. But if you're not willing to talk, and I've called some of you and you don't want to meet, okay? You didn't want to get together. If you want to, I'm absolutely on board. But don't talk about things that have nothing to do with land use, because I'm not down for that. Otherwise, I'll approve this plan as it is. But I want to get more than 6. I think that's good for everybody that we get more than 6 on board. And so that's where I am.
Okay, Ms. Watlington and Mr. Driggs, did you? All right, Mr. Watlington, Ms. Watlington and Mr. Newton.
Yeah, so I just want to say a couple of things based on what the Mayor Pro Tem just said. So much of what you're saying I agree with. And I think that is the crux of it, is how do we maintain the flexibility piece? Like you just talked about community benefits agreements. I'm a proponent of community benefits agreements. I'm fine with putting it in there. We figure out what it looks like, but I also understand completely why people feel like that is too specific for here, because that's how I feel about 2.1. I do want to understand more about, let me say it this way. We know that 2.1 was added into this plan for a reason, because it is distinctly different from what's existing. But to your point about how we talk about it, I think that demonstrates that there needs to be some more conversation about what we're actually trying to do. I've said it before. I believe that the role of government is to correct market failures. Well, if we don't understand where the failure in the market is, I think it's premature for us to try to prescribe a solution. And I think in particular to 2.1, but broadly, I like what the mayor said in regards to we are not starting from scratch. We have a city that has been built and steeped in redlining, steeped in housing discrimination, these kinds of things. But because of that, for me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to put a blanket policy in place when we know that it is going to disproportionately impact the very vulnerable neighborhoods we're trying to help. That is no different in my mind than urban renewal. We know that infrastructure went into certain neighborhoods and split them completely down the middle in cities all over this country. On the surface, it was state sanctioned and it was for the good of it was for the greater good. But we are right now trying to put a plan in place that undoes or that mitigates those very same things. So I just ask that we are careful, that we pay attention to outcomes. And it doesn't mean for me that I don't want to do anything. I think we were supposed to meet this Thursday. So I'm happy to talk, but let's talk. If we're going to have these conversations, let them move somewhere. And all I am trying to say is that if we're going to be prescriptive, let's make sure we've got some analysis to back it up. This is a $2 billion enterprise. I don't think anybody can go anywhere at a company or organization that size and say we're going to do this, which draws a line in the sand without a business justification, something. And so I'm not against any of the particular components that maybe some of my other colleagues are against. I am against making decisions without adequate analysis. And I think there are some things that we all can get on board with, and it doesn't have to be controversial. Let's go ahead and put those on the table, get them voted on, and get moving on them. The other stuff, let's do our due diligence, because then I think it makes it clear. Let the data tell the story. But yeah, like I said, I'm happy to meet, but I want to make sure that we're doing something that moves the needle. And I also want to say this. I know that this has been a very difficult process, very challenging. I want to make very clear that I absolutely support the assistant city manager and planning director. I do believe that you came here to do the right work. I don't believe that you are operating without integrity. I think it's very difficult to have these conversations. I do think there's some opportunities, and we've talked about those, but I absolutely want folks to know and understand that I've got the utmost confidence in Mr. Jayoba and the work that he does. That doesn't mean that we're going to agree on every issue, but in terms of the person and the staff that's been working on this, I haven't seen anybody show up to work and not want to do the right thing. So that's it for me, Madam Mayor.
All right, Mr. Newton, followed by Ms. Ajmira.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if Dimple or Ed might need to go ahead of me. Just commenting on this particular conversation. So I am more than willing to have conversations with everyone as well. I just wanted to also mention that I feel like we can encourage and incentivize, create more units, including duplexes and triplexes and single-family development within the city, much like Councilwoman Watlington was saying, without a blanket approach. And I think that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at an all or nothing blanket approach. And I just feel like, given some of the potential unforeseen consequences, or frankly, some of the foreseen consequences, that just feels a little bit reckless to me. But I didn't want us to lose sight of, so not as a compromise here, but just doing the right thing and addressing a couple of items within the Goal 8, so the economic development portion of the plan. And yes, this is by and large a land use plan, but we have these other sections within it that I think are important as well. And I think economic development is very important. And I don't think it will take very long because frankly, I think we kind of squared away one of these proposals. So the aspect of benefits, I think Mr. Jayoba had really explained that one. And so it's just 2 provisions maybe for us to consider. And I think we could probably do it in 10, 15 minutes. So I just wanted to say that maybe on the tail end, I figure we'll probably get out of her early tonight, right? So maybe on the tail end.
Okay. Let's come back to that. Ms. Ajmira.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I agree with what Councilmember Eggleston had said. It's great to have.
Ms. Ajmira, can you lean into the mic a little bit more?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. So I agree with what Councilmember Eggleston has said, that we can try to get to more than 6. But I wonder how realistic that is. I mean, this conversations has been going on for weeks, months. We have had 7 hours plus meetings each time. I guess we have to keep in mind that when we compromise, how compromise could lead to losing support on the other side. I think we have to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah.
We all know what we currently have. It's not working for many, many families that are being displaced every single day. And we cannot accept the status quo. We have to change the way we operate as a city. So it's great to have more than 6, but let's be honest with each other. It takes 51% for a referendum to approve. So 6-5, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We have approved measures in the past with 6-5, and that's just the democracy, simple majority. And unfortunately, last couple of weeks or maybe even months, where certain council members have made points that are more personal than policy-based. There are personal attacks that have went on, and I think that is just not acceptable. You cannot come to the table and try to negotiate when we take the focus away from policy and we try to address these other issues that council members have, whether it's trust issue or other issues. And that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you. Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mayor. I think the difficulty of this situation is that we do actually agree on what we want to accomplish, and there's a disagreement about whether all aspects of the plan serve that purpose. I mean, I would be hard-pressed, quite honestly, to just come up with 2 or 3 things which, if they were changed, would cause me to feel a lot more comfortable about it. Or I'm worried that if I did come up with 2 or 3 things, I know in advance that those are not going to be ones that we can come together around. So we're in kind of a tough place that way. I would mention, to Ms. Eiselt's point, there's a difference between duplexes on corners and duplexes everywhere. And, so it's not immaterial.
Mr. Driggs, we cannot hear you. Could you please speak?
All right, I'll try leaning in a bit. I guess we're stuck in this place. I would love for us to come together. As again, I raised the point about how nice it would be to have at least a bigger majority, and I think that would be the case even if I ended up being one of the ones in the minority. But the concern is whether or not we know enough to be confident that the plan will serve its purpose. And we can only gain that knowledge with reference to certain kinds of data or analysis. And so I look at it and I say to myself, all right, let's just think about which items in the plan could be allowed to move ahead, because if they don't work, they won't do any damage, right? And so let's set aside those concerns. But I wish we would focus more on the notion of the CBAs and not have a situation where some people expect more from CBAs than they can legally deliver, for example. We can leave them in. They are harmless. But if the references to CBAs create an impression that they will be more effective than they can legally be required to be, then that's not being completely straight in my mind. So, you know, is that a reason for me to vote against the plan? I certainly wouldn't advocate that we need to rewrite the plan. I don't think that's what it's about. I think there are some relatively minor changes in drafting that would address some of these issues. But I would just note, for example, we were talking before about the changes that we had voted on. I moved that we remove block lengths for industrial sites and consider other changes. That was approved to 10-1, and the block lengths are still in this update. So, you know, things like that undermine kind of a spirit of cooperation. Anyway, I will happily participate in meetings. I think it's worthwhile for people in the majority to listen to and be thoughtful about what people in the minority are saying. We are not just troublemakers. We're not here to block progress. I hope you recognize that some of the things we're saying are, you know, deserve your consideration. They're serious concerns, and they're not mean-spirited or obstructionist. It's just, what is the best way to get where we want to go? Thank you.
All right, Ms. Johnson.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, I need to comment on a couple things. Councilmember Eggleston said there's not been a council member that said if this were changed, we would agree or we would vote on it. I can speak for myself. I've been asked that question, Mayor, in one of our first small group meetings, and I've been consistently against the removal of the 2.1 language that excludes or that allows single family exclusivity. So I don't think that we're coming to the meetings and saying different things. It's for me and many of us, it's that we're saying the same thing over and over to the point of ad nauseum. So I think, and I would say that 2.1, leaving the language that allows some protection of single family exclusivity is the compromise. None of us is saying that we don't need more density or we don't need more options. But I think that the option to leave some areas and protect some areas to the single family zoning is the compromise instead of all or nothing. I'd also like to speak to the CBA. I've spoken with members of the BPC and I've said the same thing. The CBA, I think it is overpromised. The language that relates to CBA feels like we're overpromising and under-delivering. None of us are opposed to the concept of community benefits agreement. As I've stated, there's been developers that have donated $100,000 to the Sugar Creek area as a concession. The last week's approval, the developer was contributing $3 million right outside of District 4 as an improvement. So I'm certainly one that believes in negotiating and developers contributing to improve the areas. We're simply saying the language, if we know that it's not a formal CBA and a CBA is a legal binding agreement or document, why are we calling it that? So I think that's where we can compromise in that area. So if you really, I think, listen to what it is that certain members are asking for, it's almost like a mother and a child. You know, your kids call you a nag, but you're really just saying the same thing over and over again. We're not changing our point. We're asking for what we feel that our voters in districts 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 would have us to ask for or to represent. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I've heard around the table, Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, I really think that I'll participate in the small group meetings, but I think that puts us back in the same place that we've been for months now, which is being managed by staff. So we've been saying the same things to each other in these meetings. It's not like we had some miraculous moment of discovery today. Those of us who have been saying these things have been saying the same things the whole time. They don't make it through. Even when we vote on them, the words magically change. So what I'm saying is we need to bypass them right now. They are why we're here in this position. So if we as a group can sit here and I can say to you, I will with those two minor changes, and let me tweak them again, take away capital community benefit agreements and just go to lowercase community benefits, which CBAs may be that answer coming up. Or it might be something else that's better than that. We don't box ourselves in a corner, and then we go over to single family zoning and we say, I would rather delete it, but to compromise, say leave it in and bring it up that level, which says aggressively pursue density with affordability. And then if we need to put examples underneath that of abolishing single family zoning and other things like that are all things that we will explore, by all means, let's put that. This hard codes in abolishing single family across the community. And anyone who then changed their vote when we went from lots to place types, you know we can walk away whether you know it now or not with the fact in your mind that this wording is the exact same thing. So if we have to bring that up a level and use those as examples, that's fine. And that's me compromising on things I think are terrible, like capping height unless we do benefit agreements uptown, and all these other things, inclusionary zoning, impact fees. What I'm telling you is I will take all of those things and we don't have to even discuss them. Because those things, while they hurt developers, they hurt the affordability of the real density that we're going to go after in these next 20 years. But these two items right here, CBAs and single family zoning, hurts the demographic that can least afford to be hurt by them. So that's why I'm sitting here and saying, I think, how many people would agree to that? Just that right there.
I have to just say, I don't agree. And there were 6 people that said they don't agree with a single family only designation. So that's off the table because 6 people voted against it.
But your staff is not giving you that as an option.
I'm not talking about staff. I'm talking about us. I'm saying, that's the problem. Well, but everybody can go talk to staff and come back.
Okay. We're not going to.
Hey, you asked a question. I'm responding, please.
Yeah, I'm telling Larkin why
staff
will manage us.
That issue's off the table, okay? But, just a minute. Let me just say, if you take that issue and say, how can you take predominantly single-family zoning and get more density into it? If you want to talk to staff, anyone who wants to come back with an idea, let's talk about that. I mean, I'm open to hearing about that, but no, I haven't heard that yet in all of these hours.
I suggested that several times. I said
what's the plan?
There must be a way to establish criteria instead of having on a scale from here to here to this.
Can't hear you, Mr. Driggs. Can't hear you.
Sorry, the microphone was off. There must be a way to establish criteria. I've said it several times instead of having to go from here to this point on a scale like this. All we have to do is define our terms. We have to say these would be the conditions under which some areas might still enjoy single-family zoning protection.
But that's the whole premise of what I'm saying right now to you, Mayor Pro Tem, which is my whole point, which is I'm not saying we've been agreeing on these things. We get managed by staff and we are not there. So the fact of the matter, if you're saying 6 people or more, we're down with that. We just got handed back with a stamp of approval from the planning director and the city manager, the opposite of that. What I'm telling you is they divide and conquer us and we are being managed. And the only way we're going to get past that is not allow them to keep doing it. So you can say, well, we are in agreement and that's a non-issue. The fact of the matter is what is before us to vote is not that. So that's why I'm saying small groups, while I will participate, it's just another mechanism for them to divide and conquer us, which is a bad tactic for city management.
I I want to say that I've heard a lot of discussion, and I haven't heard anyone say that they're not willing to have a conversation. I have heard some people say they're not really ready to change their minds. I have heard that. And I'm sorry, Mr. Bakari, really, why do you have to insert your commentary in my remarks? I didn't ask you about that. I'm sorry, but you shouldn't, I mean, it's just not right to interrupt all the time. Okay. That's my perspective, is that I have heard some people say that I want to have a meeting and talk, but I have not heard everyone say that. And if we're going to go with the idea that it has to be someone that's voting at this point no to go to yes, then I don't know if that can happen. But I think we ought to try. And I don't care if the manager's in the meeting or the planning director's in the meeting, because everyone in here has the ability to figure out where people are and to get together. And you can do it wherever you need to do it or whatever. But at some point, we are the people that were elected, and you have to figure out who's going to do that. And I'm going to go along, and I have to say the Mayor Pro Tem has made a point, and I think this is like one of the, you said, well, we should say that we're not abolishing single family, and one of the examples would be to say, here's what we would allow or what we wouldn't allow. I think we have to figure that out, because that's really the number one issue here. And if there is a place that has an example of doing that, no matter where it is, or something that you think, what is the, and I think that I have heard, what is the criteria? I think if you have what is the criteria that you would allow, and there's a way to write it into this, then we do it. But it's really at this point that you own this. We all own it. And so if we're going to own it, then if there are people that are willing to change or compromise, and there are others that are not, and that's okay. That's just where it is. So I'm going to actually suggest this, that our next meeting is the 24th on this. I'm sorry, today's the 24th. Sorry. I'm just really, the 7th of June. And at that point, we're going to have something that's written up. Now, Mr. Newton has asked for 10 minutes to get item 814. Is it 814, Mr. Newton?
So it is 814 and then an additional separate item to be included at the tail end, which would then become 833. And I can run through these quickly.
All right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so
Does everybody have a copy of what Mr. Newton has in his hand? Did we send it to electronically?
Yes, so the email that I sent you earlier, that was a forward from
At
from Ty.
6:11.
And you just scroll all the way to the bottom to see his original language, and then you'll see what the attorney suggested up above.
And so just to put this as simplistically as possible, so if you scroll to the last page, and for
What page
anyone,
is that, 3 or 4 or 5?
this is the 5th page.
5? Uh-huh.
Yeah, so the 5th page where you actually see 814, and then on page 6, you actually see 8.32. That would then change to 8.33 because we have a new 8.32 in the updated plan. You can see we're on 8.14. There is highlighted language, and then on 8.32, which would then become 8.33, that's all new language. But essentially what we're talking about here, so in 8.14, the language of the plan says explore policies and programs such as community benefit agreements, but I'm just asking that we also explore policies and programs, or have something here that talks about workforce development as well. And then on the back end of this with what would then become 8.33, it's just ensuring that we also promote partnerships with apprenticeship programs, particularly in the building trades industry. So that's it simplistically. Those are the two items.
All right, any discussion or comments? Mr. Driggs?
I agree with the two items. I'm not sure they belong in this plan. I think the fact that you want to see them in this plan is a reflection of a kind of mission creep that occurs in other places in the plan, like the idea that we're going to deal with obesity So I imagine that's why you thought that. But I think we should have a clearly defined agenda for topics like that. And we do. We should just continue along that path. I don't know that the plan is the place to try to realize those things. And there are concerns expressed in these emails about them. And rather than try to resolve all those issues on the back of this plan, I think we should just pursue them separately. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Mayor Pro Tem?
I would agree with that as well. As I think they're very worthy endeavors to really talk about. I think it belongs in our in our Economic Development Committee, Workforce and Economic Development Committee to fully flesh out. I just don't think it belongs in a land use plan. This is, for me, where I would say I'm just going to stick to what I have agreed on if we start getting too far away from that.
Ms. Ajmira? Ms. Ajmira? Ms.
My hand
Ajmira?
is not up.
Okay.
I know Mr. Phipp's hand has been up for a while.
All right, so I think the gentle councilwoman has yielded to Mr. Phipps. Mr. Phipps.
Thank you very much to the lady from at large, Ms. Ashmere. I was wondering, because I mean, I have no objections to what this language says, but still, I mean, is this something that's embedded in our practices in workforce, in our economic development area? Is this something that we practice when we recruit? I mean, is this a common thing that we undertake anyway?
I think that what we really, the workforce development plan is being drafted now. I think that this would be a good fit for consideration in the workforce. Actually, going through all of these, I think would be making sure that we have a connection between the plan and what we're saying. So I would say that it could go in the workforce development plan that's being developed now.
But it's under development. It's not now. But
no, it has not been approved by council as of yet.
Right.
Mr. Picard, do you know when you expect that to come back?
It's going to not be within the next couple months.
Okay. All right. So in a couple of months, the workforce development strategic plan would come back. Ms. Ajmira.
Yes, I guess a question for Mr. Newton. Oh. So are we doing negotiations right now, or I'm trying to understand what's the...
No, this is because it's the right thing to do. That's what I mentioned earlier. It's not a compromise. It's not for anyone to take sides. It's because this is language that isn't clearly defined here. And to be clear, there is a lot of specificity in this plan. And at the same time, and you can just look, I mean, I could pull a provision off practically every single page pertaining to our goals. And so all I'm saying here, and certainly this is overall a land use plan, but I mean, we have a section devoted to economic development, right? And there are many items within this section that aren't land use items. So having said that, I don't see this out of bounds, right? If anything, what I see this doing is further defining what our priorities as a council are for the next 20 years. And I think that, we talk a lot about workforce development, about folks, particularly right now, we're still in a pandemic, right? We're seeing a lot of people have to move laterally. They have to get new skills, they have to go through new training. And that's something we talk about being a priority of ours. So that's why I kind of feel like now's a good time to make sure, we live up to the, those commitments we've made, put it inside this plan. Economic development, apprenticeship programs. I don't think that that's such a wild thing to do. But I mean, that's just me. And hopefully it answers your question.
Yeah, I guess, Madam Mayor, if we can just see if there is 6 council members that support this, or even 5, and if there is, then we move forward. If not, then there's no point in discussing this. So do we need to make a motion? I'm trying to understand. I know we are having this discussion, but it cannot move forward if it doesn't have majority support.
So I'll make a motion.
Okay, I'll second it.
Because you've got the email chain. On page 3, there's an 814. Is that what you're suggesting proposed on Matt?
Yeah, so 8.14 to include an emphasis on workforce development, and then as you'll see, the language the language
Where's
within.
the language?
So here it says 8.32, but now we have a new 8.32.
Okay, so go back to 8.14. Tell me which language there's proposed, which the city attorney's office said there probably are some limitations.
So that's not included. So the language pertaining to workforce agreements, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just specifically talking about workforce development.
Show me, tell me, is it on this page?
Yes,
Where is
so
it?
it's highlighted right here.
I'm sorry,
towards the
we
bottom.
have black and white.
Towards the bottom, 8.14.
So 8.14 is explore policies and programs such as community benefit and workforce agreements to support the
So not the
development. Is
workforce
that it?
part. Yes, but not the workforce part. Just explore policies and programs such as community benefit agreements. And then it goes on to say to support the development of new retention of community assets, amenities, and for the purposes of workforce development.
So on this, yeah.
So Councilmember Newton, is there language on the handout that is the specific language that you're asking for, or is it something that needs to be augmented? Because I think that's part of the confusion.
So the way I would look at this is I think you could simply include workforce development within 8.14. This is so I think this is kind of the trouble here is the fact that we have a new 8.14, right? and so we couldn't just simply adopt the language that I proposed 2 weeks ago, because now we have new language within the plan. So what I'm saying is inclusion within the new language to include workforce development programs.
Was the new language an attempt to, I'm going to ask Todd, was the new language an attempt to capture what Mr. Newton is saying?
So something that we need to also keep in mind is that while you were having your comments, we were also getting comments from others too. So the new language is a reflection of the comment that we see from the community, which seems to be alignment with what except for 8.14. But I believe there was another email from where Ms. Hagler said we can have that language, just strike out workforce and keep workforce development. Just strike out workforce agreement, but keep workforce development. I think it should be at the very top of an email that was printed for you.
Email.
Yeah.
But it also includes community benefit agreements.
Yes, yeah. But the current language right now has CBA there, but what Mr. Newton is saying is to include workforce development in that language. And we're okay with that if we did it out.
To support the development of new and retention of community assets, amenities, and for workforce development. And what does that mean? Workforce development? Give me the phrase, the definition of workforce development.
Yes, it's really more of more of training, the pipeline in getting them ready for the workforce. I believe that this, actually, and I haven't spoken to ED about this, but I think this may be, they also play a role in the jobs plan that may be developed in the future as well. But we do have.
I think that it's always a tough one when we don't know the exact language of what, we can't look at the language right now. It's not very, I'm sorry, I had Mr. Eggleston and then Ms. Johnson.
I was just going to propose to Mr. Newton that if we are all expressing a willingness to have conversations, be they with staff or each other, about what changes could move no votes to yes votes. Might we include this conversation in that? Because I, for one, I'm looking at this email and there is a lot going on here. So I think having a better understanding of what we're talking about than I'm able to discern from this email would be helpful for me individually. But also, if we're talking about things that help move the needle for certain council members, and again, Mr. Bakari has made reference to modifying the language around community benefits in a way that still preserves the objective of them. And that language is included in here too. Might this be something we table for those discussions instead of trying to vote up or down tonight?
I'm not asking that this be used as a bargaining chip. I'm asking that we consider this because it's the right thing to do. And I think in that context, I'd like to move this forward. I'm going to make the motion. I don't know if there's going to be a second.
I have Ms. Johnson first, Mr. Newton.
I'm going to make the
know
motion that we vote on this.
Okay, Ms. Johnson was on first. All right, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, I was just going to ask if someone could pull up a slide or the email so that the public, A, can see the language that we are discussing, and two, that if there are modified changes, then it can be typed out and we can take a look at what's being discussed. That's one of the things that we do on council. It's a lot of information, and it would just really help for more visual aids for the public and also for council members.
That would be helpful.
Type exactly what he's saying or pull up the email, because I'm sure our public is lost by now.
I think that's a great point, but we don't have it typed. It was a handout of an email that was sent over the, I think that we didn't have, and all we have is the handout, and you have an electronic copy. So I think that
I do, but there's been 10 minutes of discussion and the public can't follow us. So
I understand, but we weren't prepared tonight to know that it was going to be up. So I don't know. In fact, I think Mr.
I've been asking.
The same way we did it last week. If someone would pull up a PowerPoint slide and just type what's being proposed or cut.
Hold on, Ms. Jackson is telling me what.
So Ms. Johnson, the person that was in the room last week to do that is not here. So it's going to take a few minutes for me to figure that out, because I have to figure out who's going to share their screen, because I'm running 2 or 3 screens right now. So if I share mine, it's going to be all over the place.
Well, I agree with you, Ms. Johnson. It's tough to have these conversations in the absence of the material in front of you. And I think we just need to make sure that if we're going to do that, we need to bring it a little bit. But I think this was also where the staff left it out. So we take the culpability for that. I agree. I understand.
For us to have this. And so I was actually a bit shocked that it wasn't here for us tonight. Having said that, I don't know how much more simplistic it could be. 8.14 is to include workforce development. So when we talk about exploring policies and programs such as community benefit agreements, we do that to the extent that we do that in a way where we include or create a focus or include a focus on workforce development policies and programs. And the city manager and I just talked about that 2 seconds ago. So I think he might have, an idea of how to put that together. The language for that. And this other one is just, hey, let's work with apprenticeship partners, right? So we can promote apprenticeship programs throughout our city. Well, once again, I think in both contexts.
Let's do one at a time. Okay,
yeah,
why don't we
upward mobility.
Why don't we do 8.14? All right, Mr. Jones, do you have?
I'm going to have to ask Mr. Newton to help me. So 8.14 in this version that we have in front of us currently says, explore policies and programs such as community benefit agreements to support the development of new and retention of community assets and amenities. And what Mr. Newton would like to add now is, after amenities, as well as promote, and Mr. Newton, I need your words.
Yeah, promote workforce development policies and programs. or workforce development? Because, I mean, that might be redundant to say policies and programs.
Okay, so, Mr. Newton, are you making a request that we take a straw vote on this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so everybody's heard the conversation. Now, I'm going to go through the roll call for this.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Mr.
just as a
Bakari?
point from the ED perspective, I also don't think it belongs in here, but I also don't think a lot of the things that are in the plan belong in there. So whether it's directing 50% of CIP dollars, which is another department which hasn't been able to weigh in, or this and the countless other ED-related things that are in here. So I have a hard time taking a principled stand voting against Mr. Newton's request when literally the document is filled with stuff that doesn't belong in it. So with that perspective, I will, what?
That you'd rather take out.
I mean, of course.
Okay,
But the point is, if we're voting it up with everything.
I think Mr. Bakari made his point that he is going to look at this from the perspective of the entire document. All right, so now, any further discussion? All right, I'm going to do a roll call vote on moving forward with Mr. Newton's suggestion for 8.14. All right, Ms. Johnson?
I did have a question.
Okay.
So Mr. Newton proposed new language for 8 point, I think it was 3.2 or something?
No, we're just dealing with 8.14. That's all we're doing right now. That's what the motion is.
Yes.
All right? Yes. Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Ms. Mayor Pro Tem?
No.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
All right, so that's 5 votes. And this is the 5 votes. I can't remember. In budget, it's 6 and 5 here. 5 here. So it will be put in the revision, and it will be wordsmithed to make grammar work correctly. Okay? All right, now.
Now, 8.33, which I don't think we'll have as many problems with or as much trouble with, but basically it just says promote partnerships between existing Department of Labor registered apprenticeship programs, city departments, and contractors in the building trades industry for workforce development purposes. So that's the language. It's not as though anything needs to, it just be something new included. So no amendments, no changes of anything that's already in the plan.
This is a new 8.33.
Yes, yes, sir. So 8.32 would stay. The new 8.32. This is a new one that would just be added to what is already in.
Now, why did you put the Labor Department? Why not where there were opportunities all across the board?
They have certain, so from the standpoint of certified programs, there are safety standards. Now, if that's something that, the council wants to take out, I mean, certainly the emphasis is on apprenticeship programs, but in my estimation, I was thinking, there are heightened industry and safety standards associated with that, but.
What does this have to do with land use? I'm just really.
I mean, once again, we could say
All
that
right,
for about.
I see you, Mr. Phipps.
about
All
2 million
right,
things within this plan.
Hold on. You've presented it. You've asked for it to be included. Mr. Phipps?
Is this, I'm wondering, is this not due now already? Or is this something we're trying to emphasize even though we're doing it already?
We do have all of the apprenticeship programs inside our organization, and we do encourage it. I've gone to several of our businesses, particularly out in the, oh gosh, I've forgotten which business park. There are a number of German companies that do this all the time. I think it's an emphasis thing, and I don't think it has anything to do with the plan necessarily. It's just something, I'm going to say, Mr. Newton, this is one that I think definitely belongs in the workforce development plan, because that's what we ought to be encouraging us to go out and recruit new businesses to do this, to be able to participate this way. So I don't know why we would add another item 2.
I feel like you could pick and choose what we already do within the plan. You could really look at this and say that there are a lot of plans that we implement today that are scattered throughout
And I think it
this
could
comp
get lost
plan.
scattered throughout, and in the workforce development plan, it's a specific effort for the economic development team to put in recruitment and opportunities. So for me, it's watering it down instead of emphasizing it when it's 8.33, but that's just an opinion. It's not really
On the
any
flip
fact.
side,
So
why
you've
would we
got a
take the
motion.
others out? So I think we should put
Okay, let's
something
go
in.
ahead and vote on this one as well. So, Mr. Phipps, did you get your question answered?
Oh, yeah, yes, answer.
Okay, all right. So this is for I'm sorry.
Ms. Johnson also has her hand raised.
8.33. All right,
Mayor.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes, thank you. So I'm looking at the revised plan, page 127, and there are several goals in here, several objectives that speak to workforce development that aren't applicable or specific to land use.
Right.
There's something that says maintain or increase the number of middle-skilled jobs. There's another one that says increase job training opportunities that allow residents to obtain hard and soft skills needed to qualify for jobs within the city's target industries. There's another, there's a page of ED language. So I don't know why Councilmember Newton's request would be considered inappropriate or out of place in this plan.
I don't think that anyone has said that. And all I said was I thought it would have more emphasis in our workforce development plan, and we've just started having the straw vote. So, Ms. Johnson, where are you? Yes or no?
I'm a yes.
All right, Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington? Mayor Pro Tem?
No.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
No.
Mr. Eggleston?
Why not?
Huh?
Sure.
All right, Mr. Graham. Okay. I am sorry, but I should have continued the roll call vote on the other item. And so I had Ms. Johnson, Mr. Newton, and Ms. Watlington as yes. Mayor Pro Tem, no. Ms. Ajmira, Mr. Phipps as yes. Mr. Winston, on the original motion on the 8-114.
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
No.
Mr. Eggleston? Mr. Graham? Okay. All right. So that is the end of our agenda for tonight. What I heard from everyone is that you have the opportunity to think about it in the way that Mr. Eggleston framed it. If you are willing to actually come up and have a method that would change your vote, then go for it. And whether you want to meet with the manager or the planning director, it's Memorial Day weekend. I think that they'd appreciate it if you did it by Friday, or at least gave them until next Tuesday. We'll be back on this one on June the 7th. So take a break over the holiday weekend. Think about it, but try to figure out if you can meet on it before or after the holiday weekend. Do I have a motion for adjournment? All right, it's unanimous approval. Thank you very much, everyone.